magic is useful. With magic, you can do almost anything if you know how. The problem with magic is that in most times, places, galaxies, existences, and spectrums, the necessary infrastructure to support the use of magic as a means for accomplishing things isn't present. Because of its near-infinite usefulness, cultivating the infrastructure needed to use magic was the primary economic power in places where it existed. Zenith was a very large planet, a very long ways away from Earth. It was aptly named as it was the apex of magic in any known civilization. Many things were possible on Zenith that were not possible anywhere else in the world. This wasn't because the native population of Zenith was particularly adept or skilled, but because Zenith brimmed with magical energy in a way that no other place could or would or should or likely ever will again. Because of this massive fortune that the Zenithians were bestowed with, they benevolently ruled a significant portion of existence for eons and eons. Until they didn't. Like most societies with an innate edge, they became dull and lackadaisical and complacent, and they stopped innovating. Eventually, that gave way to greed and corruption, and then totalitarianism, and finally outright war. Zenith, as a society, collapsed, as all great societies eventually do. Zenith, as a font of magical power, remained as strong as ever. Boyd had moxie. Across the galaxy, most of the more refined societies had eliminated the idea of the self. The same way that evolution prefers those groups that work together over those that work alone, self-preservation above all as an instinct eventually loses. Think about it on a long enough timeline, the idea that humanity outlives ants is laughable. Ant colonies don't have internal strife. There is just the colony. The group survives as a whole and is more prosperous because of it. Across the galaxy, those populations that were most successful had long since taken on an ant-like mindset. While not all societies were as single-minded as the ant, the idea that one person had more value than another, even to the person in question, had become faux pas. Boyd did not suffer from this affliction. Somewhere outside Haskell, Oklahoma, United States of America, Earth, Sol, Milky Way galaxy, Boyd and his friend Walker were attempting to impress girls. Impressing girls was one of Boyd's most important goals. Because he was neither particularly attractive, nor particularly intelligent, impressing girls usually required acts of extreme stupidity or copious amounts of alcohol. Boyd was always happy to provide and participate in either. The night's goal, as agreed upon earlier by both gentlemen, was for both men to successfully coerce their dates into sexual intercourse. Unbeknownst to both Boyd and Walker, the girls had arrived with the same idea, but both had started to question the decision after the gentlemen's infantile attempts to woo them were found lacking. The girls were currently trying to figure out the most reliable way to end the evening without offending, but had long since given up on either of the gentlemen as romantic partners. Currently, Walker thought he was holding an M80 firecracker in one hand and a half-empty bottle of rye whiskey in the other. He and Boyd had been lightning and throwing M80s into the nearby pond in an attempt to impress their dates with their courage and bravery. While this act seems to contradict Boyd's general sense of self-preservation, it should be noted that all men have weaknesses, and Boyd's weakness was most definitely girls. While the explosions were considerable for the size of the firecracker, they paled in comparison to nitroglycerin-based explosives, which was what Walker was actually holding. Boyd noticed this well before Walker did, and while he knew very little in life, he could clearly see the firework was not the same as the one he held in his hand. A quick flash of memory from his childhood accurately placed the implement as a high explosive that his father had once used to clear stumps from their property. Knowing the power and prestige of the item, Boyd did what anyone with a combination of moxie and self-preservation would do. Boyd didn't say, "No, stop." Boyd didn't say, "Everyone, look out." Boyd didn't throw himself in front of his date in a moment of spontaneous chivalry. Instead, he chucked the real M80 he was holding at the pond at the absolute perfect angle, dove behind the old Ford pickup parked next to him with remarkable speed, and then covered his head in a way that prevented the blast from sending a piece of shrapnel directly into his ear. This was an exceptionally unlikely occurrence that had large ramifications across the universe. Infinity engines are an essential component to a successful magical enterprise, but they rely upon order. While the universe struggles towards order, that old villain entropy always remains. Boyd, an agent of entropy in every way, benefited massively from this unlikely success. Boyd's action was inherently chaotic and thus utterly unpredictable by even the most exceptional magical infinity engines. If he had held the M80, if he had thrown it most other directions, if he had decided to jump under the truck rather than behind it, if he hadn't covered his head the exact way he did, none of the sequelae would have occurred. Boyd, typically a menagerie of poor decisions, impulsively completed a series of actions that beat odds of better than 4, 628, 844, 245, 764, 908, 534:1. The ensuing explosion led to the death of his 3 friends, the loss of his prized pickup truck, and Boyd's remains never being found. His obituary was published in the local newspaper. His family held a closed-casket funeral. He was mourned briefly and then forgotten on Earth. Boyd wasn't dead. He wasn't even on Earth. Boyd was alive. Boyd was kicking ass. Lord Grand Assembler Fadir of the Foray was in the midst of the most important day of his life. Assembly, the process by which a suitable group would be selected for the Empress's next foray into Zenith, was amongst the important duties in Falarion society. The underlying work required years of effort and the toils of hundreds if not thousands of Her Highness's loyal subjects. Without a successful foray, society would struggle for the interim decades until the next assembly and subsequent foray. Assembly was, simply put, a foundational effort for the success of the Falari as a whole. It went terribly wrong. To understand what exactly went wrong, you would need the equivalent of several PhDs in fields that are not yet discovered on Earth. The simplest explanation would be that amongst the several million calculations necessary to bring the 5 most compatible warriors from across the universe into the same locality at the same time required precision to nearly 1,000,000 decimals. In other words, small perturbations across the universe can affect the underlying results. What occurred at this time can be attributed in part to a rounding error instituted by Boyd's irrational and improbably successful attempt at preserving his own life. A foray was comprised of 5 combatants. One of the combatants was standing in the same room as Grand Assembler Fadir. Lord Fleon, High Paladin of the Falari, was the leader of this year's foray. The other members would be simultaneously summoned from across the galaxy, said to arrive at the same time. They had been systematically picked without any level of bias. They represented the best of their cultures, those most likely to succeed. All 5 had been contacted and agreed to represent the Empress and the Falari. The outcome of today's assembly was a known commodity, planned years in advance. They arrived just as expected, blinking into existence with the final push of a button from the Grand Assembler himself. Transposition leads to instantaneous transmission, and thus the results of years of work happened in an instant. Everything went as planned with one notable exception. Zult, supreme hydrophysicist of the Numidian domain, had been replaced by an ape-like creature wearing denim jeans and a faded cloth shirt bearing the insignia of a musical group called Def Leppard on the front, and touring dates on the back. The expected outcome, that of Zult suddenly appearing in place, would have been a feather in the cap of any foray. Zult was a sorcerer of immense power. The frog-like Numidians excelled at the arcane arts due to their oversized brains and unrestricted access to aqueous magic. He had topped all other students at Numidian University, having completed research into novel forms of aqueous arcane magic that dwarfed the current levels of the time. His scholarly endeavors would have netted him extremely respected positions anywhere in Numidia, but he had other plans. He had willingly joined the Rana, Numidia's elite soldier unit. The Numidians had been at war with the Serpen for several generations, and the Rana had gone from first-line forces to last line of defense as the Serpen won battle after battle. Fatality rates were nearly 100% for all Rana soldiers, but Zult was fearless. He had led his people across numerous battles against the warlike Serpen collective, ultimately reclaiming the ancestral home of the Numidians, and liberating those that had been captured by the Serpen. His name was croaked across Numidia endlessly and forever, a hero to his people and the paragon of his kind. His inclusion in the group was considered a great boon for Fleon and his liege, the Empress of the Foray. But the expected outcome wasn't meant to be. Zool didn't show, and Boyd appeared in his stead. Boyd wasn't a sorcerer. Physically, Boyd had traveled across space and time and was sitting in a stone room with 4 people he did not know and could not understand. Temporally and mentally, Boyd was elsewhere. He arrived in a white room marked assignment on the walls in dark red coloring, each wall bearing a single instance of the word. In front of him was an entirely human-looking woman in her mid-40s. She was wearing a World War II-era nurse's outfit. She was attractive and smiling, but in the sort of way that made you feel comfortable, but not uncomfortable. She hummed a tune as she typed on an old-fashioned typewriter. She sounded slightly southern, which Boyd found comforting as it meant he might still be in Oklahoma. Boyd stared at her for a few seconds, placed her as a nurse, and then realized he must be in a hospital. Given that Walker had attempted to blow him up what was just a few seconds ago in his own mind, he assumed he must have a concussion. This would explain the odd surroundings, but not impoliteness, so he did what came natural now that he had come to. The woman extended her hand, but Boyd was still using his to cover himself. "Hello, my name is Zina. I am here to process your assignment. Don't worry about the nudity. This is standard." Boyd removed his hand slowly, but didn't feel a handshake was in order. "What assignment?" "We are here to assign you. You'll need to select a class and align your mana cores for integration. Coming from a non-magical society, this will be a relatively simple process as we can process you directly." "Ma'am, I haven't the foggiest idea what the hell any of that means. Is this Oklahoma? I didn't wind up in Texas, did I?" "No sir, you are on Zenith." "Oh, I'm from Haskell." "Where's Zenith?" "Y'all by Muskogee?" "No. We are very far from Oklahoma." "Like Europe?" "Like across the universe." "Space." Boyd felt an unfortunate feeling well up in his gut. Having never felt anxiety before given his lack of responsibility or cares in life, it was an entirely new feeling for him. He had drifted through life accepting whatever was occurring as the truth. The idea that untruth existed, outside of mainstream media of course, was upsetting to him. "How did I get here?" "A rounding error." "What's that?" "Like a spaceship?" "It's an issue in magical mathematics that occasionally occurs. Believe it or not, the error was mine. While the error was intentional, this was not the predicted outcome, so now it has become an actual error. That's the problem with errors, I guess. Always difficult to sort out. I will need your help with that though. Sorting out this little error." Boyd was confused, which was pretty typical for him in normal scenarios, and thus to be expected in this extremely abnormal one. "What do I need to do?" "Wait, why would I want to help you? I feel like you might have kidnapped me." "Space kidnapped me." That's a fair assessment." "I did. Unintentionally. I'd like to be able to return you to the place from whence you came, but I will need your help as I mentioned earlier. Foremost, I'll need you to agree to assignment, and then agree to a foray. Your party has already been assembled. You simply need to agree to join them." Boyd laughed. "Once again, that's a load of gibberish to my ears, ma'am. Can we break this down a bit simpler?" Zina sighed. "I was hoping to avoid this, but here we go. Pretend you're in a..." She paused and typed at the typewriter before looking up, "video game. This might make the whole exercise simpler actually. You're in a game. You need to play this like a game. Do you like video games?" "Hell yeah. I play Madden." Zina sighed again after some more furious typing. "Madden. Right. Okay, so all the players in Madden have numbers, right?" "Oh. Like in Terminator. Okay then, why didn't you say so?" Boyd beamed a smile at Zina. "You agree then?" "Oh, thank gods, okay, maybe the direct approach is what's needed. Hold on a second, this won't hurt a bit. Sit here please." Zina tapped a spot on a bench and a drill-like device descended from an opening in the ceiling. She placed the drill-like device over Boyd's head and it started to glow. Boyd would not call what happened next painless. In fact, it hurt a lot. A whole lot. The pain gripped him until his vision started to fade at the edges. He wanted to move, but he was held in place, like he was paralyzed. Eventually, he gave up and just blacked out. System integration complete. Hello Boyd. I am System. Hey, that hurt like shit. Yes, it hurts immensely. I lied to you, because you wouldn't have done it if I told you the truth. Now it's done. Your mother likely used this same trick on you. It works on many simple creatures. Boyd thought about it and decided this was true. He was offended at the implication, but was more interested in the ensuing changes in his vision. In each corner of his vision were tiny squares with a single letter. If he ignored them, they faded away, but if he focused on them or thought about them, they reappeared. It was like having a touchpad full of information in his vision. They contained a wealth of information about his life. He already knew all this information, but it was nice to have it in a written format. Many of the screens returned unpopulated when he tried to examine them further. Boyd mentally glanced at a glowing exclamation point at the bottom right corner of his vision. A screen popped up in front of him. System, mana attunement achieved. Origination, Earth. All messages will be delivered in Earth in English. Cultural references will be related to 20th and 21st century Earth culture, United States of America. System, basic scanning feature activated. You can now learn basic facts about your surroundings using Zenith's inherent database. If you focus on things on Zenith, you will receive tooltips to help you acclimate to your new surroundings. Your HUD has been updated to reflect your scanning capacity. Welcome to assignment. Tabulating innate stats. Strength, 3. Agility, 3. Constitution, 5. Intelligence, 2. Wisdom, 3. Charisma, 2. You have unlocked 2 additional skill points via life experience. Your points were automatically assigned to Wisdom and Agility due to lack of class options. This is non-revocable. Strength, 3. Agility, 4. Constitution, 5. Intelligence, 2. Wisdom, 4. Charisma, 2. System, Zenith-based mana origin detected. Inherent abilities unlocked. Tabulating inherent abilities. System, inherent ability, unexposed. Because your first exposure to mana was on Zenith, you are acutely attuned to the local environment and can draw upon local mana reservoirs more effectively. Your maximum mana and mana regeneration are increased by 100% while on Zenith. Casting spells on Zenith is significantly easier for you than for others and costs 50% less mana. System, inherent ability, agent of chaos. Your unpredictable actions predictably have unpredictable results. Look, if I knew what this would do, it wouldn't make much sense, would it? System, inherent ability, uncultured swine. You are gross, no one looks like you, you don't know what's happening, and no one wants to be near you. The best thing you can hope for is pity. Whenever you would critically fail a task, it becomes a critical success. Not knowing what any of this meant, Boyd simply asked, "How am I doing? Are those good?" Zina gave a nervous chuckle and rolled her eyes. "I am doing what I can. I have a limited amount of control over assignment as the internal tuning gives me only small bits of leeway. I've tried to do what I can to help you, but unfortunately we are not working with wet clay here. The good news is that we are far from over, but I can say these are unusual inherent abilities. In fact, I don't believe I've seen any of these before. I am not allowed to comment on the relative value of these, but I can say that uniqueness is often viewed as a positive. We will now select your class. Please note this is an extremely important decision and should not be taken lightly. I can walk you through your choices, and you may take as much time as needed. There are 2,735 available classes to new originations, although you are unlikely to be able to select from all of them. Even still, this may take a while as the computational power required to determine if advanced entities can ultimately become weight it's done. System, welcome to class selection. Tabulating classes. You are eligible for 3 halves, 735 classes. Option 1, Monk, unassigned. Please see attendant for details. Option 2, Explosives Handler. Please see attendant for details. Option 3, Empowered Demonic Envoy of Ashmedai. Please see attendant for details. Uncultured Swine, Agent of Chaos activated. Boyd briefly looked at his options but was confused. When y'all said class and assignment, I thought you meant like I was going to a school to learn some shit. I don't know what any of this is. My little brother Slayton did all those fightin' games, but I was more of a Madden guy like I told you. And Big Buck Hunter. Speaking of, if this is a game I want a gun. Y'all got guns? Zina's fingers waved at a console. The closest analogy we would have to such a device would require you to have access to intelligence-based classes, and given your intelligence, you won't be able to select one. I will now explain your choices. Boyd held up a finger. What is an empowered demonic envoy of Ashmedai? That one seems a lot better than the other ones. Let's just go ahead and select that. What buttons do I push? Wait. Before you make any selections, please allow me to go through them one by one. This is a significant choice, and Empowered Envoy of Ashmedai isn't without issues, although it is indeed extremely surprising to see that on the list. System considered your very low stats and overall lack of choices as a critical failure, which caused your inherent ability Uncultured Swine to activate to give you an extremely powerful option that would normally be massively restricted. That would have been Zina wagged her fingers at the console. Goodness, it would have been Seraph, the highest form of Archangel, but Agent of Chaos activated as well unfortunately, and thus it flipped your choice to Empowered Demonic Envoy of Ashmedai. If this was purely about power, I would strongly advise you to select that one, but I must let you know that if you were to select that one, Lord Fleon would be required by oath to slay you. Moreover, you would forever be indebted to the archdemon Ashmedai, who will likely torture you endlessly for failing him when you eventually die. Finally, your mere presence in Lord Fleon's base would activate all defensive measures he could muster. While you would likely gain unimaginable power, you would also be left with nothing and no one to guide you in a foreign land and with no understanding of your capabilities. That would be unfortunate. While it is possible you could survive your escape from this facility and grow immensely powerful, the more likely outcome is a lifetime of torture and consignment of your soul to a deep layer of the hells. Gaining any sort of additional ranks as an empowered envoy would also be extremely difficult. Even a rank 1 empowered envoy is far more powerful than the overwhelming majority of classes at extremely high ranks though, so there is still some upside here. Realistically, this whole thing is equally unfortunate for the other members of your foray, as Seraph is amongst the most powerful of spellcasters, and would have complemented the rest of your group nicely. As it stands, we can go through each selection and make the best determination. However, were you to choose Empowered Demonic Envoy of Ashmedai, that would immediately end our conversation and place you in the unenviable position of defending yourself from extremely potent foes. Welp, that one's out then. Don't matter anyway, cause my Grammy got me baptized Christian, so I can't do that one. I can't even do this demon guy on account of the fact my soul got saved by Jesus. Zina looked up from her typewriter. How does one save a soul? I have never heard of this technology. Are you suggesting this person is capable of restoring a soul to a prior state? This is a powerful technology indeed. I was under the impression that Earth was devoid of magic. This Jesus must be incredibly formidable. What other spells does he know? He came back from the dead, turned water into wine, and even walked on water, Boyd said proudly. Zina, comforted by the information, responded simply, simple cantrips from a parlor magician. I feel you may have been duped. Necromancy, transmogrification, and abjuration are common here. You will see. This Jesus of yours would fare poorly on this plane if this was the extent of his ability. No matter, let us discuss your options. Boyd was confused, but he'd been that way for a while. Fortunately, he was also accepting, and the idea that it was this or death propelled him forward. Your first class option is Monk. The Monk is a physical damage-focused class that uses its fist to damage opponents. You will learn to control your inner chi and focus your body into a deadly weapon. Monks derive their power from all attributes, but primarily rely on their wisdom to enhance their abilities. A monk is a holy warrior and must pledge himself to a deity to draw divine power to channel his mana into chi. Unfortunately, no deity is available for you to worship. That is bad as. Wait, can't I just pick Jesus? I already worship him. Correct, which is potentially why no deity is available to you. However, Zina paused. How do I say this? While I do not question the divinity of your chosen god, he seems to hold no sway here. Perhaps we are out of his typical purview. Boyd nodded. That makes sense. He's Earth Jesus and we're in space. Zina blinked and composed herself. Sure. So, without a deity, you will be severely limited as a monk. You will have no way to channel mana into chi, and thus ultimately you will basically be limited to training your physique. You will be unable to harness the holy energy that powers your strongest attacks. Overall, I would give this choice a D. It's better than nothing, and that's about it. You could eventually get enough stat points to start delving into other disciplines. You would ultimately be limited in that secondary class, but at least you would have a chance. Boyd thought about it. I have a question. Do I have to do the vow thing? What's that? The vow thing? Ah. Yes, Zina said with a grumble. Nice. Let's come back to that one. Actually, just for the record, if any of these mean I can't have sex or drink or in any way impair my ability to have a good time, you can scratch that one. Finally, having had enough of the charade, Zina did what nearly omnipotent computer systems desperately trying to cover their ass typically do and handled the rest of the problem herself. Well, the next one is literally titled Explosives Handler, which seems like it might be a bad thing to mix with inebriation, so maybe we just go monk. What do you think? Great, I marked you down as monk, unassigned. You know what? It's okay. We'll figure it out. Monk it is. Zina began smashing some buttons and the exclamation point icon became a C. Upon glancing at it, Boyd discovered he was a rank 1 monk, unassigned, and his stats were listed as before. He needed 10 experience points to level up to rank 2. Wait, what if I wanted to do the demon thing? Too bad at this point, you're a monk. Get out there and go get him. I don't understand. Question what? Yeah, this one was hard. What grade did I get? Boyd asked. Excuse me? On the assignment? What grade did I get? A rush of light hit Boyd in the face. I have no explanation, sir. I am terribly sorry. I will resign my post immediately. Lord Fleon, High Paladin of the Foray, heir to the Sunrise Throne, and Lord Keeper of the Blade of Light and Majesty, was rarely flummoxed. Being flummoxed was not consistent with his titles or his rank. Being flummoxed was something that happened to people lesser than him. A state of flummoxedness was something that would apply to squires or lower nobles, those that were further from Iora's grace. It would not suit the High Paladin of the Foray to occupy a state that belittled his importance. With that being said, Fleon was most definitely flummoxed. The combatants had been carefully selected based on highly refined criteria. They needed arcane arts and divine providence. They needed sword and steel. They needed bow and arrow. They needed someone to find the traps that littered Zenith and disarm them, but they needed someone with the constitution to absorb the inevitable times when those traps were not discovered. Lord Fleon was High Paladin, and thus command of the combatants would be up to him. He had drafted a Foray that was so immensely powerful that he would be heralded as the greatest High Paladin of his people in a century. His life, the life of his people, was contingent upon a successful assembly. He would not, and could not fail. The first of his combatant companions was supposed to be Zult, however this was not to be. Zult had been replaced with a hairless ape-like creature that bore much in common with a large portion of the universe as it was known. He was the source of Fleon's flummoxedness, and Fleon decided it may be best to first validate the presence of the other combatants. The second of his combatant companions was Gmal, known more commonly as just Gmol. He, she / they was the sole member of their, her, its species and the living embodiment of Lam, the over-slime. Gmol was amongst the most powerful divine-infused entities in the known universe, having direct access to Lam itself. All Gmols had descended directly from Lam, as they served as his physical recreation after his exit from the first cycle. Physiologically, Gmol was most resemblant to a slime mold. Physically, he looked much like a mossy mushroom with bits and pieces of plant matter hanging off it. In all actuality, he wasn't that much more complicated. Most of the time, he took the shape of a cylinder with a hat on top that was about 4 feet tall and about 2 feet in circumference with lumpy plant bits attached. He had 2 black dots on the top of him that were commonly mistaken for eyes due to their placement, but were actually closer to exhaust vents or an anus. He was a single-celled organism that reproduced through mitosis. This was a rare event, but occasionally, Gmols were absent for a period and then reappeared as if nothing changed. The only thing that changes from one Gmol to the next was the number of Gmols on his name. Gmol, also known as Gmol V, was the current iteration and had retained not only the training and life experience of previous Gmols, but also wielded the divine powers of the Overslime as all Gmols before him. Slip of the tongue, Gmol's goal was simple. Lam was the god of rebirth. His religion focused around the beauty of the cyclical nature of life and death. Gmol did exactly what Lam would want him to do. Create. Destroy. He spread the word of Lam, and this was a simple message. The world was a revolving door. All things needed to fulfill the cycle of rebirth. What was composed must also be decomposed. Lam, and by extension Gmol, wasn't evil. It wasn't good. It wasn't aligned with anything. It existed for its divine inquisition that was contingent on 2 things. Create. Destroy. Perpetuate the cycle of rebirth. What better place to test his mettle than Zenith? The third combatant's story begins as so many do. Dogs remain the most prolific parasite in the universe, having inhabited close to 30% of all known geographical entities with intelligent life, in addition to their natural homeworld, the 7 planes. The 2-stage life cycle of the dog begins with the parasitic canis form, wherein it ingratiates itself into unsuspecting homes and collects power in the form of verbal and physical affection while it pupates. It stores the emotional energy provided by the host in its anal glands until its death. Upon expiring, the soul of the parasitic canis form is transported back to the 7 planes through necromantic magic, a specialty of the parasitic dog culture. The canis then uses the emotional energy in its anal glands to empower its second life cycle stage, lupus superior, characterized by the ability to shift between the bipedal and wolfen forms, and a significant increase in size, strength, intelligence, lifespan, and ruthlessness. While some dogs retain their aggression from previous life cycles, the canis form is largely passive. In contrast, the lupus form is known primarily for its relentless and unceasing urge for violence and war. A massive planet-wide struggle for supremacy occurs across all 7 planes indefinitely and forever. When a lupus falls in battle, the doggish necromancers transport its canis soul back across the galaxy to collect the loves it needs to pupate again and rejoin the war of the 7 planes. Such was the fate of dogs. Endless loves. Endless war. So it comes to our combatant. None had collected more loves than Jellybean Jenkins. Jellybean was of pure blood from the noble West Highland White Terriers. His adopted family, the Jenkins family of Earth, had spent the entirety of his existence rubbing his belly, stroking his soft white fur and kissing his little black nose. He went on car trips. He ate only the finest food. He dominated dog shows aimed at appreciating his magnificent beauty. He was given treats every night. He slept wherever he pleased, and left his scat where it lay. He collected the Jenkins energy for almost 22 years, substantially outliving the average terrier. When he finally expired, the tears from the Jenkins filled his anal glands with reservoirs of emotional energy that would power him and his clan for generations. Jellybean Jenkins drew on this power to be reincarnated as the most terrifying beast in the Seven Plains. 8 feet tall with the rippling physique of a Greek god, Jellybean Jenkins led the Westies to conquer vast areas of all 7 plains, until he eventually was proclaimed Wolflord of the Terriers. Marked by his 2 massive twin battle axes, Bite and Claw, Jellybean's pure white fur was permanently stained with the blood of his enemies. Now over 200 years old, and at the height of his power, Jellybean Jenkins, Wolflord of the 7 Plains, had finally agreed to become a combatant on behalf of the Foray. War was expensive, but like Ted DiBiase says, everyone has a price. Jellybean Jenkins' price had been steep, but Flean knew talent when he saw it. The final member was Salia Slit. Like most Venians from Venia, Salia was, foremost, an engineer. She did what most engineers do, and spent her time building things and reading and learning and rebuilding things until they were useful, and then she sold those things to others for goods and devices she could use to build new things. That was the life she enjoyed. Venia itself was non-magical for centuries, so Salia's people had little experience with magic until incursions from surrounding planets began happening. The Saldas Empire installed a forward base of operations near the Venian capital without even realizing they were there or ever even bothering to check if the planet was occupied by a large group of very tiny hyper-intelligent engineers. Initially, Salia's people were safe and simply remained hidden, happy to share the planet with others. The Saldesian incursion had little effect on Venian society. Venian people rarely grew more than 1 to 2 standard centimeters tall, and Venia itself was several billion square kilometers of lush and fertile lands. The Venians were happy to share, all the way up until the point they realized that the insurgent forces had no intention of preserving the natural beauty of Venia, and instead were sheerly there to rape and pillage their beautiful planet. Having never built weapons nor used magic, the Venians remained hidden from view until they successfully completed their prototype, a novel and unique hybrid tech/magic combination. The first Venian mechanized ranger, VMR, was piloted by Salia Slit herself. It was a perfect replica of Venian biology, which amounted to a cross between a hummingbird and a primate, but outfitted with state-of-the-art weaponry and made from a nearly impenetrable alloy native to Venia. In her initial conflict with the Saldas Empire, Salia killed 13 Saldesian elite commandos before the VMR had to be abandoned. Subsequent iterations were far more successful. By the time the Venians had a full battalion of VMRs, the Mark III suit was in near mass production. 1,400 VMRs destroyed the Saldesian capital planet in less than 6 weeks, while only taking 6 casualties. The death toll for the Saldas was in the millions. And now this guy. The weird ape creature. Flean, increasingly flummoxed and increasingly angry about it, had lost his temper. He yelled, an unpaladin-ly thing to do. There has to be an explanation. That is clearly not his wetness, Zult of the Numidians. Explain this madness to me. Who is this person? What is his class? Fadir, shaking from nervous energy, said he is a human named Boyd Bridges, his class is monk, unassigned. Unthinkable. Bringing someone such as this to Zenith was tantamount to homicide. Flean, the reality of his situation now coming fully to bear, asked, what are his attributes? His rank? Please tell me there is something here. Fadir, blinking back tears now, simply stated, quite poor sir. The numbers are here. Flean's overlay was populated with Boyd's statistics. They would barely have qualified him for a work permit, much less real training. Lady of Light and Mercy, the creature is barely literate. Fadir, explain this travesty to me this instant. Lord Grand Assembler Falerion Fadir ran through the calculations at breakneck speed. It took him the equivalent of around 30 seconds to identify the mistake. He clearly and cleanly explained this to Flean, and then bowed his head and left the room. He would never return and would likely be cast out from society. Felarians, like humans, sometimes make mistakes, but this one would not be forgiven. Fadir's name would ring throughout history. His family would be shamed. His soul was forfeit. Flean was High Paladin though, and letting souls go forfeit was against his oath. Fadir, stop. I offer you the mercy of the sword. Awestruck, the technicians and other assemblers bowed their heads. Such an offer was beyond gracious in the Felari. Flean was keenly aware his own place in history would likely be tainted by this day, but that didn't mean he wasn't High Paladin here and now. I graciously accept High Paladin. Please tell my family I am sorry. Fadir removed the robes of the Grand Assembler and placed them neatly on the ground next to him. He stood fully upright and then fully extended the long, curved neck that characterized his people and bowed it in front of Flean, placing his head on the ground. Flean drew his sword in disgust. The remnant corpse began melting into the ground, now soulless and without purpose. The mercy of the sword was more than Fadir deserved. He had failed, but Flean was High Paladin, and preserving souls was still his duty. Nothing could atone for Fadir's actions, so the blade atoned for him. Flean entered the room full of his future foray to try and explain himself to his new companions. Boyd awoke in a large amount of pain and a typical amount of confusion. Given his penchant for drugs and drinking, hangovers were a normal aspect of life. The ringing in his head was beyond this typical amount though, which usually meant he'd gone on a bender. He briefly recalled a weird and unfortunate dream that he couldn't quite remember that involved a nurse and some machines. In this case, he slowly began piecing together the fact his dipshit friend Walker had tried to blow him up. Wendy? Sarah? Walker? Boyd yelled for his prior companions, but to no avail. Instead, he looked over and saw what he effectively processed as monsters. Boyd looked quizzically at his soon-to-be new compatriots and gave a particularly human response, screaming at the top of his lungs before immediately wildly striking at Gmol. His fist compacted against the mushroom/slime blob, effectively doing nothing other than burning his skin, whereupon he withdrew it and began screaming in pain. He ran towards Flean in a panic as he was the most human-looking thing in the room, albeit dressed as an Arthurian knight, but was subsequently tripped by the inhumanly fast Salia, who subsequently planted him against the ground with her fist. A ribbon of iridescence flashed up Gmol's normally green appearance and Boyd's body became still and stiff instantly. Salia bristled, "Is this a test? A joke? What is this creature and why was he allowed in this room?" Flean sighed, "I am sorry to say that. This is clearly chattel. Let us eat. Thank you Lord Flean for providing this meal. Transposition has left me ravenous." Jellybean Jenkins, Wolf Lord of the Seven Plains, stretched his neck out and his lower jaw began to grow. As Wolf Lord, he was accustomed to eating first. He cast the two wickedly bladed axes he held in his hands aside and licked his lips at the meal set before him. Boyd was unable to protest and in fact, unable to move. Interestingly, he could still urinate. He could feel it leaking out of him, which was probably due to the intense terror he felt at being eaten by a giant white talking dogman monster creature. To give credit where credit is due though, the slime creature, the bird-like lady that punched him, and the human-like creature with the weird neck and golden plate mail were almost all equally terrifying and weird. Obviously, Boyd was having some sort of dream, likely from some sort of concussion due to dynamite explosions. Having eaten LSD many times as a kid, he knew the right action was to blindly accept things as truth and ride out the dream sequence until he woke up. Flean extended his sword towards Jellybean Jenkins. "You cannot. While I regret to inform you of this, I must explain myself. The assembly failed. The responsible party's life is forfeit already. I took it myself. Zult will not be coming, and instead, we have been provided this creature. This thing is called Boyd and it is a human from Earth." Upon hearing of his former home, Jellybean Jenkins took a step back. He smiled wryly and said, "Earth? Explain your failure." Flean sighed. "As you are all aware, the party is assembled. We are all now combatants and are linked until we begin the foray. Boyd cannot be replaced for the meantime. If he is killed, we simply continue as 4. The likelihood that we attain the same level of success as a team of 4 is close to 0, but we 4 remain formidable. It is simply too much to ask, even of combatants as highly regarded as yourselves, to achieve the same goals we previously agreed upon, but we can at least make our mark as we can. While I cannot imagine he can provide much, if we can keep him alive long enough to gain some semblance of usefulness, I believe he could at least carry things for us. I simply cannot apologize enough for this unforgivable mistake. All the same, I remain the leader of this foray. My suggestion is that we put this to a vote. Who votes that we allow this Boyd creature to join us, and who votes that we end him now and dismiss this foray entirely? My vote is he is allowed a chance to join. Boyd was aware he could understand the languages even though they all sounded quite different. The long-necked human made ape noises, the dog barked, and the robot bird lady tweeted, but it all sounded like English in his brain. He was also aware they were voting to kill him or not, and was hoping he might get a say in the matter, but remained unable to move. Gmol's form shifted and a symbol appeared in his stomach. Boyd had never seen it, but empirically understood it meant, sadly, no, this one must be reclaimed. Our bargain was dependent on you providing a foray with a chance at success. We are now missing a critical member. Put this out of its misery. The black dots near the top of his form that Boyd thought were some sort of eyes focused on him. Another symbol appeared in Gmol's chest and Boyd understood this to mean, I'm sorry, human. Boyd's only hope was the bird lady as the dog creature was clearly planning on eating him. That hope didn't pan out. Salia was blunt to the point of flippantness, he is a rank 1 monk and is unassigned. His stats are pathetic. No. I didn't come here to babysit and bringing him with us is no different than killing him now. I don't know what your assembler did Fleein, but this is a pretty piss-poor start to things. Boyd, realizing he was about to be eaten, now defecated as well. Jellybean Jenkins, Wolf Lord of the Seven Plains, wrinkled his nose at the stench. I vote yes. He should come. However, if you could kindly remove your paralysis spell, Gmol, it appears like this one has befouled the den. Fleein, please have someone clean it. Fleein paused, having already assumed that Jellybean Jenkins would be voting in favor of eating the newcomer. 2-2. The last vote goes to Boyd, I guess then, as a member of the foray. Gmol shined iridescently for a brief second and Boyd realized he was again capable of moving. Fleein extended his neck towards Boyd. Indeed, he smells of piss and shit. Regardless, what say you then Boyd, human of Oklahoma? Live and join our glorious combat or die here shitting yourself on the floor. The next few hours were characterized by many different things being explained to Boyd, usually very slowly and with many repetitions. The long and short of it was that he was to choose between execution and competing in what amounted to an interplanetary mix of supermarket sweep and Running Man. Both options would likely result in his death, but one option was immediate, and the other held the promise of untold riches, although this was extremely slight. While each of the forays and combatants had different reasons for being here, all of them were ultimately competing for the same set of prizes. Inside Zenith was the maze. It was the greatest source of mana in existence and as such was itself, the most valuable thing in existence. Inside the maze were mana nodes. These mana nodes were tappable, and if claimed by a foray, would provide a stream of mana to each of the groups for the next 30 years. This stream of mana was so pure and so potent that it was the primary source of power for dozens if not hundreds of societies across the universe. Complicating the matter, every 30 years, the maze reset. Each of the mana nodes spaced throughout Zenith could then be reclaimed and would remain the property of the claimer until the nodes reset 30 years later. This cycle had continued for longer than anyone could remember. Because the maze was such a massive source of revenue, most of the successful societies who were aware of it were also highly dependent on it. The maze had become both the world's largest lottery and the world's biggest sporting event. It was the Super Bowl and the Powerball jackpot at the same time. The maze was massive and layered and had progressively better prizes the deeper you went. That meant that having a strong team that could go deep into the maze also led to massive amounts of mana and the rewards that accompanied it. Quite simply, Zenith and the maze was a focal point of the universe for all magical societies. No one understood how it started, or if it would end. For now, it simply was, and it was important. Zenith wasn't simply a shopping mall that you could walk into and pick and choose your mana sources though. It was insulated from the outside by a membrane-like structure that prevented access most of the time. If you think of Zenith as an egg, most of the time the membrane was hard like the outside shell. Every 30 years it would become thin and porous like the inside membrane of an egg. At that point, a single spot would become thin enough as to allow people to enter. One of the limiting factors for cultures to enter Zenith was the fact that even at its thinnest, the only way past the barrier was by transposition. This was initially discovered by an ancient and now defunct race of creatures called the Sultan, and thus the barrier was commonly called the Sultan Barrier. During each 30-year period only 500 people would be allowed inside. The Sultan Barrier would close immediately after the 500th entry. Efforts to get additional people into Zenith typically resulted in death due to whatever craft they had attempted to use exploding against the barrier itself, although it seemed like every year a few more managed to sneak past. No more and no less than 5 people could participate as a team. 100 teams entered on behalf of however many races or groups or planets they represented. This was selected in part through random draw, but largely through a complex system of political intrigue and policy rigging that occurred behind closed doors. Regardless, once a team of 5 was selected, they were drawn together through any means necessary and listed as combatants. Once selected, the exact 5 combatants must enter the maze together. They could then do as they pleased, but due to the high level of challenge and the fact that the combatants were capable of killing each other, teams generally stuck together. Most of this slipped right past Boyd while it was being explained. He just did what he always did and nodded his head and and yeah, I get it whenever anyone asked him a question. However, when Flean quizzed him over even the most mundane aspects, it was clear none of the information had stuck. Eventually, a list of rules were written out for him to study. This list of rules was then condensed several times based on Boyd's reading speed until it eventually became the rules. 5 people to a team. 100 teams. You are on Flean's fine foray for the Foray. Flean is leader. We want to tap as many mana nodes as you can. Tapping a node simply required your team transferring a unit of mana into the node itself. Each foray shares a mana array that stores units of mana as long as they remain a foray. This will allow us long-term access to the mana node for the next 30 years and is our ultimate goal. Nodes provide larger quantities of mana the further you go. Combat between teams is allowed and encouraged. You can leave any time you find an exit, but you can't return. You can leave your foray at any time. Your foray can remove you at any time. The only time limit is the 30-year span between this event and the next. Death is permanent. Your presence on Zenith is real. While it may feel like a simulation, you exist in a tangible entity, and your death is real. Forays may reform while in Zenith from a broken group, but must reform under a designated foray leader. There was a 10th rule that no one told him. The most important rule in the maze. Number 10, eventually, everything goes to shit. Boyd wasn't aware of this rule at the time, or he might have made a different decision. As it was, he was certainly no expert at decision-making to begin with. He decided to make a brief list of pros and cons to help him figure out what to do next. Pro: Boyd had been accidentally drafted into an elite crew of soldiers with the potential to earn almost infinite wealth and fame. Cons: the long and short of it was that Boyd was now mandated to enter what was likely the single most dangerous event in the universe without any preparation, which would place him massively underprepared and spelled almost certain death. It was also his only chance at ever seeing home again. Pro: Boyd, being from a non-magical society, would immediately be provided access to all of the magical enhancements his mind and body could tolerate. This would yield potentially dramatic increases in his personal power in addition to the opportunity to gain further levels during their foray, further increasing his personal prowess to superhuman levels. Con, it was rather quickly determined that Boyd, being rather meager of mind and body both, would still be laughably ill-prepared and unlikely to survive for more than a few days without a substantial amount of help and luck. Pro, Boyd's fellow combatants were well poised for success. Cons, none of them had even a modestly high opinion of him, with the kindest thing being said about him thus far being that his corpse would sustain them when he inevitably died, Jellybean Jenkins, and or that he would be allowed to carry foodstuffs until that moment arrived, Flean and Salia in a moment of empathy. Pros, he was alive. Cons, this place was worse than Texas. The 5 of them were seated at a large table. Others had come and gone from the room in attempts to explain core aspects of the maze or the current predicament to the team at large. They had brought food and drink and tried their best to convince Boyd that he needed to accompany the others. What happens if I say no? What happens if I just walk away from this? He asked. Jellybean Jenkins rose from his chair. I will bind your corpse with ropes and throw it in the transporter myself. I did not travel this far to be thwarted by a half-wit human. Salia interrupted, that won't work and you know it. He has to enter willingly. Jellybean Jenkins scowled at Salia, he did not know that though. Flean raised his hand, Boyd of Oklahoma, what is it that you would need such that you would accompany us on this journey? At least as far as into the maze itself so we can pursue our foray as 4. Look man, I just want to go back to Oklahoma. This shit ain't it for me. I got a family, and a truck and a job and friends. I am not cut out to be no warrior adventurer. Send me back. They all looked at each other. Flean spoke first, Boyd, I have no means to send you back to Oklahoma nor do I even understand where this place is. Salia looked at him and hung her head. It was clear she would be of no help. So, I just have to live here now? Boyd asked. Jellybean Jenkins smiled broadly, how far is Oklahoma from New Hampshire? Boyd looked up, wait, you been to Earth? How you know about New Hampshire? Jellybean Jenkins scratched at his neck with his back foot. I pupated on your miserable backwater. I could send you back. Possibly. My people can transport souls effectively. I don't know that we've ever tried transporting a human, but it might be possible. This would of course demand that you acquiesce to our wishes. Do you have other options? Can I think about it? Flean interrupted, nay, friend Boyd. Unfortunately, we will need your answer now. Will you allow our people to suffer or will you join us in the maze? I simply cannot overstate the stakes of this endeavor. While I know you are new to this, many civilizations rise and fall on these results. My people are dependent upon this mission being successful. If we were to lose out entirely on this foray, it would lead to starvation, destruction, and death for thousands if not millions. I must complete this. But in order to do so, I need your assistance and we must make haste. The pods will close in around 4 hours and our position will be offered to others. Boyd thought about it for a bit, so I gotta help, and then you can do your thing, and then you'll send me back to Haskell? I just need to go in and then we find an exit, right? No, it is more similar to how you were brought here. At a specific time, we will enter some pods that will take us directly into the maze itself. Then I can just leave? More or less. We'd need to find an exit, but they are plentiful. Then I can go back to Oklahoma? Jellybean Jenkins nodded and licked his lips, I will set our most vile and cunning magi to this task. Fine. Let's do this shit then. The team marched down a long metal corridor to the pods that would transport them inside the maze. The Foray was known not only for their holy fervor for Ior, but also for their superior magical and technological capacity. The base built at the edge of Zenith's atmosphere would serve as their transposition point onto Zenith's surface at the appropriate time. In spite of this, Boyd's presence damaged the underlying morale of the team and the walk was largely silent. Flean had intended this period to be full of intense planning and thoughtful discourse on the most prudent actions. As it was, he was just trying to figure out how they would survive any interaction with another foray of combatants, and how they might best avoid that for as long as possible. The loss of their arcane magic wielder was a substantial blow. Salia broke the silence, so how deep are we looking to go? Without a mouth, Gmol couldn't very speak. Instead, there was the large interface occupied by a rune in his center mass. He used this to communicate, and could even broadcast its image if needed. Currently, Gmol's internal rune flashed the number 368. Salia laughed, maybe with Zult, but you think still? With this guy? Salia motioned towards Boyd. Gmol's internal rune became a thumbs-up sign. While he didn't have thumbs, or even hands, Boyd understood what he meant. Flean sighed, I agree with Salia Slit. I think the record is now out of reach. This is truly a shame. I had wanted to bring glory to Ior. What's so significant about 368? Boyd asked. That is the deepest anyone has ever made it. The dangers that lurk below there are not known to any degree, Flean responded. I bet we can do it. Boyd said. The group looked at him but dismissed the comment. We should open our stat sheets to each other. We should know each other's capabilities, Salia said. What do you mean? You all already know mine, Boyd said. You left yours open, what else were we supposed to do? Wait, how do I close it? Boyd asked. Salia was almost always inside of her VMR. Her Venian form was tiny and frail. The VMR was a weapon of war. It was a perfect exoskeleton, almost identical to Salia herself, but armed to the teeth and virtually indestructible. Salia, and the VMR, sighed, the whole purpose of this conversation is that we are trying to open this to everyone. Why would I tell you how to close it? Doesn't matter. Just focus on someone and a menu will pop up. If they let you have access, you can click on their character sheet, same as you can your own. Boyd stared at his companions and found the menu appeared in each case. He began looking through everyone's stats and was surprised to see just how far behind he was. System, Flean, rank 817 High Paladin of the Foray. Strength, 662. Agility, 255. Constitution, 600. Intelligence, 54. Wisdom, 678. Charisma, 810. Salia Slit, rank 322 Mechanized Ranger. Strength, 262. Agility, 1395. Constitution, 430. Intelligence, 1450. Wisdom, 58. Charisma, 122. Gmol, rank 1436 Avatar of the Overslime. Strength, 12. Agility, 86. Constitution, 115. Intelligence, 92. Wisdom, 6678. Charisma, 9. Jellybean Jenkins, rank 696 Wolflord of the Seven Plains. Strength, 1112. Agility, 931. Constitution, 822. Intelligence, 182. Wisdom, 54. Charisma, 2542. After everyone had a glance at one another, stat sheets were closed again. Boyd was disappointed all then same. I'm less strong than the slime? I'd be sadder you are less charismatic than the slime, Salia said. Jellybean Jenkins licked his paw as he walked. I have bred thousands of times. I am sire to millions. I am wolflord to millions more. Before my transformation and evolution, I was voted both cutest pup in Merrimack County and New Hampshire's handsomest boy. My charisma knows no bounds. Your fear is because of your understanding. I will consume you someday. Those who are outside of my ire appreciate my grace, lineage, and beauty. Boyd looked over the stats again. None of this makes any sense. Y'all have hundreds of more points than me. How the hell am I ever going to catch up? Also, why do you have all these awesome classes, and I am still just monk, unassigned, which sounds weak as shit. Flean clapped him on the shoulder, never fear friend Boyd. These things can be raised through training, through equipment, through many different things. You will soon be twice the man you are now. Which, admittedly, would still place you as the weakest creature in the maze. Boyd thought about it for a bit as they walked. So how do I get some good gear? Any of you all have something I can use that you don't need anymore? You only get to take in what you can carry, so no one takes in extra gear. There is much to be had within the maze itself though. I believe that we can find you a few rings. Rings? What about like some armor like yours, Flean? There is no armor like mine. My armor was crafted by the first High Paladin, Floim of Floim. It has been passed down through the ages to the High Paladin of the Foray, and is only used in time of greatest need. It is made of alloys long since forgotten, using magic that no one alive is capable of now. It provides me with almost infinite stamina, and more importantly, serves as a shining light too. Salia groaned, "It doesn't matter because you can't use armor, you're a monk. You're supposed to use your chi to harden your body against blows. You don't have any chi though. You're also supposed to have a high wisdom score, which you use to predict attack patterns. You don't have any wisdom to speak of though. You're supposed to develop your agility so that you can use that wisdom to adeptly avoid blows, but you don't have any agility to speak of either. So, basically, yeah, we will find you some rings, and that's about it. If I was you, I would just put all my points into strength. The only thing you are potentially good for is carrying bags. The more strength you have, the easier it will be to carry bags. We'll get you strength rings so you're extra good at carrying bags. How does that help us get mana nodes? It doesn't really, but it does save me having to pick my bag up and then put it down. Boyd felt very useless as he climbed into a tube that he didn't understand to go to a place he'd never been with a group of people he'd never met. Transportation into the maze was instantaneous. In one moment, Boyd was sitting inside a metal tube looking at fellow combatants in some sort of mobile space station, and in the next, he was in a large open field. The effect stunned him and left him wobbly. When he regained his composure, he found everyone else was furiously at work in their packs rearranging things into belts and other places. Salia was outside of her VMR for amongst the only times he had ever seen her. Her tiny little body almost microscopic. She fluttered from point to point checking each tiny individual aspect of the VMR before the top of the suit opened and she squeezed into it. Boyd owned nothing, so his pack was largely empty, except for some food and potions. The clerics of the Foray has filled it with those items after explaining the others would need them some point. He was not to eat any food without permission and most of the potions stood a good chance at outright killing him. He wasn't sure if this was true or told to him to discourage him from using them without permission. Boyd stood still and took a moment to look around. He wanted to contemplate exactly where he was. If he knew what the Elysian fields were, he would have assumed that was where he was. It was beautiful beyond compare, a field of flowers and grasses, cutting every shape and size imaginable. 2 bright orange suns bore down overhead, yet the temperature was perfect. It was peaceful. Serene. He marveled at the location, but it made him miss Oklahoma. Haskell wasn't as pretty as this, but this place reminded him of the best mornings he had spent fishing. Welcome to the maze. This is level 1. Currently 100 forays remain. Flean said, looks like it's a utopia level. Probably Portcullis if it's level 1. Should be simple. I'm guessing 20 seconds. Maybe less. Boyd, duck. Ducks? No, duck. Head down. Now. The first arrow fell well short of them, but it was clear that it was meant to hit. The next arrow was slightly closer and the following one was no more than 30 feet away. The VMR's head unit lit up and it spoke, Slender Nomads from the look of the arrow. We should move back a bit. The arrows aren't dangerous to the rest of us, but the monk might die if one hits him somewhere critical. Arrows started appearing from behind them at this very moment and shortly after that to the right and left. They edged ever closer. Right, well, this should be fairly simple. Salia, how many would you guess there are? Two small devices popped out of Salia's shoulders and went high into the air and then returned within seconds. About 40 on each side. Who wants which direction then? Flean asked. Which way is north? Boyd asked while spinning in circles and trying to figure out where he was. You do nothing. Stand still. I'll take north, which is approximately that way, Flean said, pointing towards the original group. An image appeared in Gmul's stomach that everyone understood to mean south. Salia simply said, east. Jellybean Jenkins, Wolflord of the Seven Plains, had already began running to the west. Boyd watched him as he shifted between mostly man-like shaped and mostly wolf. Tufts of hair and tissue and blood fell from him as his body began to morph. After the first few steps, he became half dogman and half massive wolf creature and took off at nearly triple his original speed. He leapt up a hill and was quickly out of sight. Flean snapped on a golden helmet over his head and neck and began running himself. Looking at the direction Flean was now running, Boyd saw approximately 40 creatures that amounted to almost two-dimensional sticks riding on top of hot dogs made out of cacti. They were all holding bows, which were nearly undetectable unless they were turned to the side. Boyd guessed each creature was no more than 1 to 2 inch wide at the most. In contrast, their cacti/hot dog mounts were thin, but slightly less so, and upwards of 10 feet long. Each hot dog/cacti mount contained 3 to 5 of what Boyd had assumed were Slender Nomads. They fired arrows high into the air, but approached slowly and with purpose. A reticule popped over one of the Slenders that Boyd was focused on. Information poured directly into his mind. He wasn't sure how it was occurring, but he knew more about them almost instantly. System: Slender Nomad, Rank 2. The Slender are the natural result of creatures who grew up living in caves and rocks. It's very useful to be able to slip between tight nooks and crannies if you live in a system of nothing but nooks and crannies. The Slender evolved just so. Whereas most creatures are approximately ovular in shape with legs and appendages, the Slender are extremely narrow, like elongated worms made out of spikes with tiny little feet and arms. In their own cave environment, they are reasonably difficult to deal with, but for some reason, the maze put a bunch of cave-dwelling creatures in the middle of an open plain. Bully for you, confusing at best for them. Given their extremely slight frame, a single Slender is not typically that dangerous. Even they realize this, so if you see a single Slender, expect a few dozen more any second. Realizing they were getting closer, Boyd took a few steps back and watched Flean. The first set of arrows plummeted into the ground all around Flean, but were soundly rejected from piercing his golden mail. Despite being in plate mail, he moved like a cat drifting past and between the cacti/hot dog mounts. Each time he swung his sword, 3 to 5 cacti and their mounts fell in half. Within a few seconds, he had worked his way through his 40 Slenders without even breaking a sweat. Boyd heard an arrow stick in the ground behind him. He turned around to see Gmul, glowing with a rainbow iridescence. The eye/anus blobs on the top of his slime looked angry. The Slender Nomads from the south were charging at top speed, ready to loose their next volley. Suddenly, one mount fell. Then the next and then the next. Boyd saw the mounted riders start to scream, which sounded like multiple tea kettles releasing steam at once. It quickly became apparent why. The ground was rising up to meet them. Upon closer inspection, Boyd realized it wasn't the ground itself, it was thousands, no, millions of tiny plant-like spores that rapidly enveloped the mounts and the riders. It grew over the top of them and coalesced into a single unit. The entire biome began to pulsate and shake. It stopped a few seconds later and the spores subsided. The only thing left was bones. Boyd's shock was abruptly halted by an extremely loud explosion from the east. Salia, via her VMR, was looking into the distance. It gave a firm nod and then went back to rearranging its pack. System: you have gained 160 experience. You are now rank 2 monk, unassigned. You are now rank 3 monk, unassigned. Oh hey, congrats, Salia said. Jellybean Jenkins returned from over the hill. He was covered in a mix of hot dog/cacti pieces and a brownish blood-like substance that Boyd assumed had come from the Slender Nomads. He was holding a tiny bone in his left hand, which was human-like in shape, while running as a wolf with the other 3 paws. Flean returned in similar condition, but without the bone or dog paws. Salia and Gmul had barely moved. Boyd threw up. After the battle, Gmul rolled or slimed or shimmied or whatever you want to call a sentient slime mold creature's non-bipedal movement over all of the Slenders. A tiny sprout of plant-like matter sprung from each of them, wavering in the mild breeze. After each, Gmul let out a small noise, best classified as relief. The group was nearly finished packing when Boyd asked, "How come I got 160 experience? I didn't even do anything. Also, what is experience?" Experience is shared party-wide. While you would have received hundreds of experience for killing any of those Slender Nomads yourself, you would certainly have died. Because Gmul is rank 1436, none of us will get more than 1 experience point for anything we do or kill for a very long time if the entire party is present, as experience points are calculated off the highest ranking member of the party. Wait, so if I can kill one by myself, I'd get a bunch more experience? Can if I go off and do something on my own to try and catch up then? All 4 party members spoke simultaneously. Dead. You'll die. Gmul's rune on his stomach transformed into a skull and crossbones. I will finally feast on your corpse when I hunt it down. Boyd looked sheepishly at the group. Jellybean Jenkins was using his extremely thin bone that he had pulled from a Slender Nomad as a toothpick. He still looked hungry. Sensing the tension, the VMR's head unit lit up and Salia asked, "What did you get?" "It's been so long since I was able to level up, I forget what it's like." "System, you have reached rank 2. You can allocate 1 new attribute point. You can allocate 1 new chi ability. You have no chi abilities to allocate as no deity has accepted your worship. Your unarmed strikes are now empowered by, unassigned, and may grant special abilities. You have no deity, this ability is not active. You have reached rank 3. You can allocate 1 new attribute point. Your connection with your deity, unassigned, has given you a supernatural instinct about danger. You will sense dangerous enemies much further away now. You have no deity, this ability is not active. You have gained access to life tap. You may sacrifice your life for mana on a 1:1 basis. You have gained access to mana tap. You may sacrifice your mana for life on a 1:1 basis. It says a bunch of stuff about all these things I got, but it always says I don't have a deity? That's wrong, 'cause I still got Jesus. The lady in my head who made me be a monk told me Jesus couldn't help here though, 'cause we was in space, and he's from Earth. I did get the 2 attribute points though. Salia tossed her pack to Boyd, "Stick those attribute points in strength and get to carrying then. We need to get moving." Flean held a hand up, "Wait a second, who is this lady in your head you mention?" The other 4 combatants looked at each other. Salia started to say, "You met," but was halted by Gmul, who began flashing symbols in his stomach rapidly. Salia stopped talking. The other 4 combatants again looked at each other. Flean said, "These abilities you were granted. Can you explain them to us? We have access to your stats, but your inherent abilities are hidden from us." Is that what she called them? Inherent abilities? Yeah, that's right. Inherent abilities. I got this one says Agent of Chaos and it means I am unpredictable. That's true. Hell, even I don't know what I am gonna do next usually. This other one says Uncultured Swine, which is sort of shitty I thought, and it says I don't have any friends and whenever I critically fail I do a critical success instead, whatever that means. And the last one says Unexposed and it means I got real good mana here on Zenith, and when I cast Zenith spells it's easier and costs less mana, but also I am apparently too dumb to know spells so it's kinda pointless. Anyway. Gmul flashed golden almost immediately and turned towards Boyd. A pillar of light erupted from him and headed straight for Boyd. Unsure of what was happening, he stood still. The next thing he knew, he was on the ground and Fleon was on top of him. Boyd was suddenly surrounded by a golden bubble that he couldn't leave, nor could he hear anything going on outside. The golden pillar of light from Gmol was now traveling into the distance. Everything it had touched was burnt to a crisp. Jellybean Jenkins sprung towards their location and grabbed Fleon by the back of his armor, then threw him about 30 feet away where he went tumbling through the grass. Jellybean Jenkins lifted a clawed hand and slashed with intention at Boyd's throat, but his hand bounced harmlessly off the bubble. The next thing Boyd knew, he was flying high into the air. Salia's BMR had grabbed him in her talons and was on a trajectory that Boyd could only classify as up, which promptly changed into down. As he hurtled toward Zenith, he realized he was very unsure of why his fellow combatants were clearly trying to kill him, but realizing he was definitely going to die, he also realized the first question didn't matter. Instead of going kersplat, he tried to do a tuck and roll and bounced harmlessly off the ground, uncultured swine activated, which he realized made no sense, but attributed to his magical bubble. Jellybean and Fleon were grappling one another while Salia was now futilely stabbing at Boyd's bubble with a sleek metal sword she had produced from a cavity in her back. Gmol was firing pillars of golden fire at Fleon while Jellybean Jenkins slashed at him from what seemed like an infinite number of angles at the same time. Jellybean Jenkins made a critical misstep at one point trying to dodge one of Gmol's fiery death beams, and Fleon promptly lopped his right leg off at the knee with his sword. Jellybean Jenkins howled in pain as Fleon charged at Salia. Gmol had disappeared into the ground, but had almost instantly reappeared next to Jellybean Jenkins. He sprayed a green fluid onto Jellybean Jenkins' leg and it began to grow back rapidly while Jellybean Jenkins snarled and gnashed his teeth. Salia's BMR dodged a series of blows from Fleon before firing what appeared to be a cannonball from her right hand into his chest. Fleon doubled over and sent him flying backwards before Salia's feet turned bright red as she accelerated at max speed towards him with the intention of burying her sword in the top of his head. Before she could get there, a lightning bolt struck between them, knocking everyone to their knees. Gmol expanded himself to 10 times his normal volume. The rune on his chest shifted to a form that meant, stop. As he slowly deflated, everyone stood up, except for Jellybean Jenkins, whose leg was still healing. Boyd, very confused, was still inside the bubble. It was quite suffocating, and he could barely hear what was being said. After a solid 10 minutes of arguing that he thought was going to come back to blows, Fleon made a motion like he was flicking a pest and the bubble fell from around Boyd. Boyd slipped as it happened and fell to the ground. Fleon walked over and extended a hand to pick Boyd up. The good news is that we've come to an agreement about you. The bad news is that you still might not like it. You are not supposed to be here, Fleon said. Boyd laughed, no shit? I'm not supposed to be here? Man, when I got up this morning, you want to know where I thought I was going to be right now? In the back of my pickup with one hand up Wendy Nelson's shirt and the other hand undoing the button on her jeans. This ain't exactly what I planned either. I am unsure what is under this Wendy Nelson's shirt, but instead you are here and we should explain to you what just happened. Jellybean Jenkins spoke first, you are of Zenith. I'm from Oklahoma. Haskell, Oklahoma. Salia shook her head no, not anymore. Gmol's rune flashed through a number of symbols. Fleon said, I'm afraid Gmol is correct. I know this won't make sense to you, but you are. Fleon said a number of words. His mouth continued to move, but the sound didn't come out for almost a full second later. Playing for the wrong team. What just happened? You were talking but the sound came later. Right, that's part of things. It also explains how you are able to communicate with us. You are clearly receiving a large measure of outside help, I guess you could say. In fact, I know of no precedent for what you are or what you could become, or even if I shouldn't have let Gmol do what he intended. Your status as a combatant is untenable at best. The long and short of it is that you are of Zenith now. The system has marked you as a component of itself. You are essentially part of the maze. Somehow though, you are also bound to us as a combatant. This shouldn't happen. Usually, either you are a part of our Foray, or another Foray, or you are a part of Zenith, or you are somewhere else in the universe, but never before have I seen anyone who was a part of both of Foray and of Zenith. Gmul flashed white for a brief second and Boyd felt calm wash over him. Stop coddling him. Jellybean Jenkins currently had the body of a wolf with a man-like face. He was curled into a sleeping position and was licking his rapidly regenerating leg. Listen to me, human. The creature that assigned you was the same creature that operates this place. It is a being of immense, almost immeasurable power that even the most advanced races and species do not understand. I have no idea how or why you were allowed to interact with it, but it has claimed you. Your abilities are derived from Zenith itself. Typically, this would place you. Jellybean continued to yip in his own language, but the sound came later again, in opposition to us. You are effectively straddling two sides of a chasm right now. You are both a combatant and of Zenith. You are both a member of our Foray and our enemy. Look, I'm not the enemy. I just want to go home. If Zenith is the enemy, that's between you and them, or it or whatever. Boyd asked. Salius said, Zenith is less the enemy than a mystery. All of us are here for the same reason. As previously noted, every 30 years the forays into Zenith are held. We enter the maze, groups claim whatever mana nodes they can, and we do it all again 30 years later. Why this happens, no one knows, but the wealth that it brings is beyond measure, and thus everyone who can participate continues to do so. This comes at a price though. While we are in the maze, our lives are very much at stake. In that sense, Zenith is most definitely the enemy. But I'm not the enemy, right? We're a team. Boyd clapped Fleon on the back. He edged away. I cannot rightly say, Boyd. If your powers are derived from Zenith herself, then by all normal rights and measures, you are indeed the enemy. At least while we are in this maze, the fact you draw your powers from Zenith would normally place you in direct opposition to our goals. Gmul tried to kill you, as he assumed you were some sort of sleeper element. A spy of sorts. While the maze is usually the same in structure, every time there are subtle twists. His assumption is that you were this year's twist. Gmul's rune made a symbol that Boyd understood to mean, sorry. While that is still possible, even if you are unaware of it, I have convinced the team that you should be allowed to continue with us based on a few simple facts. Foremost, you should know that you should never again mention your inherent abilities to anyone else. Ever. You have access to something that no one else in the known universe has. Inherent abilities are something purely of Zenith. While your current rank is extremely low, if you were to cultivate your powers, I cannot begin to explain to you just how devastatingly powerful all three of your inherent abilities are while we are here on Zenith. Just as an example, your inherent ability, Uncultured Swine, is one of the most powerful things I can imagine. The maze runs off of an immensely complex magical system. While no one understands the underlying mechanics, critical failures are thought to be responsible for many deaths in the maze. That is why we train so hard and specialize our skills to avoid these critical mistakes. Not only are you literally incapable of critical failures, but you actively turn them into critical successes. What this means is that your extremely low rank may actually end up saving your life. In fact, one could make an argument that should you actively build towards using this. If I were to hand you the most complicated spell on the planet, there is a reasonable likelihood you could cast it successfully as given the extremely strong chance of a critical failure, your inherent ability would actually invert this to an equally strong chance of a critical success. Salia interjected, when I dropped you from the sky, you instinctively tried to roll to save yourself. I couldn't possibly understand how Fleon's bubble of protection could have saved you, but it seems like whatever you did so badly that it ended up becoming a critical success and you took no damage from falling from what should have been certain death, and you sustained the bubble. Fleon continued, correct. My bubble did not save you. You saved yourself. Second, you should know there are many restrictions applied to us that will not be applied to you. I cannot say more than this, as you are a unique case. Combatants are held to a strict set of rules. These literally cannot be broken. It is impossible. Because you are of Zenith, I don't know what will, and will not, apply to you. Simultaneously, this means you have potentials that no one else has. Boyd was getting interested. Like what? Fleein shook his head. I've spent my life studying the maze to prepare for this moment, but you are a genuine anomaly. I am only posing conjecture if I am being honest. I have no idea what you can or cannot do yet, only that it is likely you are not like us. It is entirely possible that all other forays have someone like you in their group. You may be this year's twist on the maze. You may be a genuine anomaly. Regardless, finally, and you should know this to be utterly true, the reason why you are being allowed to continue is that you are of no threat to any of us. Fleein let the last sentence hang. What I mean by that is that any of us could kill you instantly if we truly wanted, and there is nothing you could do about it. I protected you from Gmul, but I will not be able to do that indefinitely if he really wanted you dead. The fact of the matter is that you are only here out of all of our good graces. If any of us ever decide you are no longer safe to keep around, we have made a solemn pact that no retribution for your death will be sought. As you are of Zenith, we will treat you as such. I would no more seek to harm my fellow combatants for killing you, as I would seek to harm them for killing those Slenders earlier. Boyd stuttered, what? Why? We explained this to you as a simulation, a game of sorts. That's true, but it's hardly that simple. You have to understand that while this is a facade of sorts, death is truly fatal in here. Moreover, the four of us are playing, if you would call it that, not just for ourselves, but for the survival of our civilizations. This is in no way a game to me. My people, the Foray, are dependent upon magic to survive. Our very souls depend on it. If I fail in here, my entire civilization will crumble. Being High Paladin is not just a title, it is a duty of the highest level. I'm not the only one who feels this way. Gmul is the only living Gmul. His death would be equivalent to an extinction of all Gmuls. Salia and Jellybean Jenkins have similar reasonings, though you should ask them those yourself. My point in all this is that none of us can afford failure. Continuing further with you in our party is a significant risk, although we have mutually decided the potential gain is too immense to pass up. We will continue to train you and level up with you. In the event you amass even a small amount of your potential, you will make us the most formidable foray the maze has seen in years. Boyd thought for a minute, so even though I am from Earth, you guys think I am from Zenith because the World War II nurse lady gave me these innate things, but also I have to do this foray thing so you can get me back to Oklahoma? What if I don't get no stronger? Or what if I just don't want to do this any longer? Fleein spoke gravely, you'll die. Or worse. Regardless, you won't be my problem any longer. Boyd stared at the four combatants. He realized the situation hadn't really changed for him. None of these people were his friends. They needed him and he needed them. Even if they tried to kill him. Boyd said, what happens now? Fleein threw his pack at Boyd. Carry these and start running. I make no others promises. We will make our way to Portcullis and cap any mana nodes on the way. We should be able to slay a number of Gorpling camps without much deviation from our paths. Ready your mount, Boyd, it is time we ride. Fleein raised his hands and performed a number of motions. His long neck flung into the air and a golden beam shot from his mouth into the sky. The beam stopped and a golden Pegasus descended onto the ground. It was tall, the size of a Clydesdale on Earth, Boyd thought, but slender and sleek. It had golden wings that looked like they belonged on an angel. Fleein petted its nose as it stood beside him. Ho there, Shalminit, Lord of the Pegasi. Thank you for traveling to battle with me, dear friend. We ride yet again. The Pegasus whinnied and everyone laughed, except for Boyd, who was still awestruck by a flying horse. He also had no idea what the whinny meant. Indeed. Let us sally forth. We shall make the town of Portcullis by nightfall, covered in the blood of our enemies. Fleein said. Salia's BMR was already floating, powered by some technomagical jet packs in her talon-like feet. Jellybean Jenkins had fully transformed into a wolf, leaving behind bits of tissue and blood. He snarled at the group and pawed at the ground. Gmald disappeared into the ground and then reappeared several hundred meters away almost instantly. The rune in his stomach waved them forward and they understood it to mean, "Come on." Within a few instants, the entire party was gone, hundreds of meters into distance. Fleeing atop his Pegasus, Gmol leaving a mole-like mound of dirt where traveled in the ground, Salia buzzing away at the head of the pack and Jellybean Jenkins loping alongside. Now knowing what to do, Boyd sat down. Around what Boyd assumed was 15 minutes later, they returned. Fleeing leapt from atop his Pegasus. The group was already covered in blood. "Friend Boyd, you did not participate in the last battle. Your absence was noted. Why have you not moved?" Y'all kinda left without me. I can run this fast, and not for long." Boyd took off a brisk jog. The group's pack bounced against his back. It hurt a little, and he slowed his pace so they didn't jostle as much. "This is a problem, Sir Boyd. You are quite slow in comparison to the rest of the group. It would take a week to reach Portcullis at your pace." A number of solutions were proposed and tried. Functionally, the best scenario would be for Boyd to ride on Fleeon's Pegasus, but it was quickly determined that Shalminet's holy aura was actually toxic to Boyd's skin and would likely kill him with prolonged exposure. During this experiment, Boyd felt pain for the first time on Zenith and also saw life, 22/25. You are mildly injured. This was disconcerting to him, but a quick spell from Gmol healed him right up. The second attempt was to have Salia carry him in her talons. In order to maintain any kind of speed, she had to grip him so tight that she got much closer to killing him. Even more disconcerting was life, September 25. You are grievously injured. You are losing 1 life per minute from bleeding. Your wounds are infected with technopoison. You are losing 1 life per second from technopoison. You will die from technopoison. Gmol again removed both the poison and provided some quick healing. Salia apologized for both the wounds and the technopoison which she claimed she had forgot she applied. Boyd remained skeptical and had the real thought that he could die here for the first time. This left him very unhappy. The third plan put forth was for him to ride Jellybean Jenkins. This plan was squashed by Jellybean Jenkins himself, who viewed this as beneath his station. The idea of leaving Boyd behind was bandied about for a considerable period. Several votes occurred, and it was narrowly decided that they would allow him to continue, with all parties switching sides at various points. Boyd was the only steadfast vote in favor of yes. Ultimately, they began walking. It actually took 6 days to reach Portcullis, but this did offer the chance to kill a number of Gorplings on the way. They had been walking for several hours. Morale was sinking by the minute. Boyd was unused to receiving system messages, so it had been a shock when the first message pulsed through his head. Boyd recoiled in shock. The entire team stopped. System update: Team Angwar's annihilating amperage is the first to descend to level 2. Shit. Salia swore. What does that thing mean? Boyd asked. It means we are falling behind, Fleeon said angrily. What does descend mean? Boyd asked. In this case, descend means they have advanced to the next level of the maze. It isn't necessarily a descension, the maze isn't a downward moving dungeon. Descend is just the common term for advancement. It also means that because you are unbearably slow, we are falling behind. In contrast, Angwar the shit-licking prick from Martiswen already has gathered at least a few mana and has descended. That means they already found nodes, tapped them, and are likely days ahead of us. This is solely because of you and your incompetence, Salia said. Boyd hung his head. Sorry, but I mean, what can I do? I haven't done any of this before. If y'all just get me to the exit, then I am gone for good and you can catch up. Fleeon grunted, indeed. We needed you to get in. Now we need you out, or we need to abandon you. I am not sure which yet. Regardless, if groups are moving this quickly, then Portcullis will be largely empty by the time we arrive. What's Portcullis? A town. It matters not. We need to start gathering mana nodes from the wild. Let's find some Gorpling camps or whatever is nearby. Wait, I got questions first. Boyd exclaimed. No one cares for your babbling human, Jellybean Jenkins responded. Let's go kill some Gorplings. The Gorpling camp teemed with activity. At the center, Boyd saw his first mana node. It was a large, glowing blue stone that sparkled even in the light. Wait, you want me to do what? Jellybean Jenkins licked his lips. Go forth and kick that wire with your pathetic foot. It will trigger the ambush. Then we feast on bloated corpses of the fetid Gorp. Boyd looked at a Gorpling. His best estimate of the definition of Gorpling would be a cross between a goblin and a pile of sentient trash. It had a big round green head, and then it was sort of random bits and pieces of things that approximated a body. They were different in shape and color but obviously were the same thing if you looked around the camp, as Boyd had never seen anything quite as ugly as the group before him. If you peppered goblin heads onto the average trash barge, you'd get something pretty equivalent to a Gorpling camp. After a few seconds of staring, information poured into him. System, Gorpling Warrior, Rank 3, Gorplings come in many different flavors, but most of them fall into the category of warrior, although a better classification might be not important enough for other work. Gorplings are decomposers by nature. They find biomass and form a Gorplair on top of it. That biomass is consumed and used to spit out more Gorplings. This process is mediated by the Gorpling Queen, which is a fancy way of saying larger pile of sentient trash. The one thing Gorplings love more than anything is mana, so Gorplairs are commonly found near small mana nodes, as larger nodes are almost always claimed by larger and more dangerous foes. They aren't fast, or smart, or strong, but they stink like shit and they will definitely kill you if you don't kill them first. Slaying a Gorpling is the adventurer equivalent of graduating elementary school. If you're worried about accomplishing this task, you probably shouldn't be here. The Gorpling oozed and paced around a nearby mana node. Why isn't it doing anything? Can't it see us? I mean, it looked right at me. I can see it. The combatants laughed. First ambush, huh? Salia said. What do you mean, friend Boyd? Flean asked. I mean, this is pretty simple. Why are we triggering an ambush? Because it's an ambush. It has to be triggered or it won't activate, Flean muttered in a condescending tone. Boyd thought for a minute. This isn't an ambush though. All of you know where the Gorplings are right now. Look here team, point to the Gorp things. Flean, Salia, and Jellybean Jenkins all simultaneously pointed in the same direction. Gmol, incapable of pointing, made an arrow in the rune on his stomach. Right, so instead of stepping on the rope, just go up there and kill them. Salia, you can literally fly up there, shove them out of the trees, and we can collect our loot and continue on. Salia was nonplussed, right, but it's an ambush. Salia started to stutter. I think I understand, but at what point in your plan do we trigger the ambush? Flean rose a hand. I think what Sir Boyd is trying to say is that we will trigger the ambush and then Salia can handle the Gorplings in the trees. Jellybean Jenkins and I will handle the ground assault that comes from over the hill. Gmol will provide healing and support and protect Boyd from harm from the Gorpounds that emerge from the holes in the ground after we trigger the ambush. I do not understand, Salia said. Gmol's stomach displayed a question mark. Jellybean Jenkins gave a wicked smile. I admire your treachery. This plan is diabolical indeed. I savor the malicious intent of your ill wishes. You will initiate the ambush and then we will kill every Gorpling in this camp before the ambush is successful. Tonight I will fill my belly with the blood of this Gorpling clan. Boyd stared at him blankly. No. New plan. Can someone tell me what happens if I go up in that tree and push that glob thing off its post? Flean laughed. There are no globs here, thank Ior. These are Gorplings. Sir Boyd, I appreciate your willingness to fight, but after we initiate the ambush, you will be lucky to survive if you try this. You should just let Salia handle the tree Gorplings as we initially planned. The Gorplings in the trees remained motionless, staring at the string littered across the path that would trigger the ambush. The 4 combatants looked at Fleon, who said, 1, 2, 3. Boyd snuck off towards the Gorpling camp. He realized he was substantially stronger than he used to be. Tree climbing was something he actually had some practice at too. He identified the closest Gorpling that was at a level he felt he could get to and then started up the tree. It would have taken him 2 or 3 minutes back on Earth, but his newfound increases in strength allowed him to do this in about 20 seconds. He was listening to the other members of his Foray count and they were already up to around 42. The Gorpling still hadn't moved or even looked his direction as he made it up the tree. He still wasn't sure his plan would work, but it was worth a try. He slowly snuck up behind it and then he did what came natural and kicked it in the ass as hard as he could. The Gorpling went flailing through the limbs until it eventually plopped onto the hard ground below them, bleeding profusely from a head wound, whereupon it quickly died. The scrolling lines on the bottom of Boyd's screen lit up again. You have gained 1 experience. System, you have unlocked an achievement, Killer. You killed something. You took its life. It was alive and had feelings. Now it's dead. This is your first time killing something sentient on Zenith. Congratulations. By the definition of almost every society in history, you have committed an atrocity. You gain 10 bonus experience. Bonus experience isn't affected by party rules, fortunately for you, so congrats on actually getting more than 1 experience. System, you have unlocked an achievement, Cold-Blooded Killer. You murdered something sentient without it even knowing you were there. Very sneaky. And cowardly. You gain 50 bonus experience. When Fleon hit 100, Jellybean Jenkins bolted, but Boyd stood in front of him with hands out. Jellybean, stop. Jellybean was ready to bound past him, so Boyd did what he did with his own dogs, back in Oklahoma. Heel boy. Be a good boy, okay? Jellybean came to a crashing halt. What did you say? Jellybean Jenkins asked. I said be a good boy? You know, like good boy Jellybean. Jellybean Jenkins began to wag his tail briskly, but Boyd hardly noticed. He raced towards the others as Jellybean Jenkins watched him. See. Look, I just shoved that dude out of the tree and killed him. Nothing happened. Nothing. Do you get it now? Fleon pondered the situation. Yes, excellent. After we initiate the ambush, there will be 1 less Gorpling to deal with. Let us commence. Boyd was flabbergasted. Salia, you are smart. You made that Iron Man bird thing. Please tell me you get this. Salia laughed. If you think I am going to thank you for killing a single Gorpling, then you are mistaken. Now go set off the ambush so I can finish the rest of them. Welp, never mind, looks like Jellybean Jenkins is already heading that way. Good. This was boring. Jellybean Jenkins loped forward, half biped form and half wolf form, until he crossed the thin piece of wire that initiated the ambush. 3 Gorplings plunged down from the trees, holding their spears straight down. Jellybean Jenkins jumped backwards and then slashed forwards, removing the heads of all 3 Gorplings in the process. Salia was already high in the air. A dozen tiny flying hummingbirds erupted from her soldiers and shot through the trees. They emerged from the other side, covered in blood, before returning to Salia's shoulder. The Gorpounds emerged from the ground and started to attack Jellybean Jenkins. He let forth a bellowing roar and they cowered before him, urinating in the dirt. They showed their yellow smoldering bellies to him one by one. Jellybean Jenkins executed each of them and adorned himself in their entrails as he walked the grounds. Boyd was reminded of the time his mama bought him a candy rope that he wore like a necklace. In contrast to his candy necklace, Jellybean Jenkins chewed the material slowly, stopping only to spit out remnant feces as he hacked and slashed his way through more Gorplings. A horde of close to 20 Gorplings poured out of the 2 nearby cave mouths, but were rapidly buried alive when the rocks above the cave came crumbling down. Gorp juices flowed out from under the rocks, confirming the fatalities. Gmol was glowing brown at the moment, and Boyd assumed this meant that the recent cave-in was likely his doing. Flean marched slowly through the field of battle, stabbing half-heartedly at any remaining Gorplings. He marched towards the nearby mana node and tapped it when he reached it. Boyd had gained a bunch of experience during this period, despite again having done very little. System, your Foray has tapped one mana node. Boyd mostly watched as Gmol set about planting slime mold spores on all the corpses. His process was always the same, and he never missed a corpse. He realized that the others had a bit of a point with regards to his approach. Given the fact this encounter was essentially child's play to them, it was probably faster to just initiate the ambush and mop everything up and then go tag the node. At the same time, they seemed completely incapable of understanding that they didn't have to do the encounter. It was almost like this whole thing was scripted and they couldn't leave the script. If that was the case, then why was he the only person who acted sane in this place? It's not scripted. That's not the right way of thinking of it. Boyd looked around trying to figure out who was talking to him. Sit down. So you don't get a concussion. Boyd looked around again. What? Then he crumpled over. She sat at a large desk stacked with papers and furiously typed at her computer. Sorry for the impromptu meeting. I do hope you braced for the impact. I actually didn't stop to check. Next time, just sit down quickly if I ask you. I don't have a lot of patience for these sorts of things. I need to explain a few things quickly to you. First of all, you made a large mistake just a few minutes ago. I cannot tell you exactly what it was due to your unique status, but please think hard about the last few minutes and do not do that thing that you shouldn't have done again. You will deeply regret it. Killing the Gorpling? Or not setting off the ambush? Do we really have to set off the ambush? Why? She moved past his question. Your companions are going to see the world very different from you. They have very different goals from us. You'll need them as you are not capable of doing what needs to be done by yourself, but please be aware that your unique skill set will offer routes to success that will only be perceptible to you and you alone. I cannot explain this further currently, but because of our unique little bond, you may find your worldview is very unconventional compared to many of the other combatants. Please feel free to express yourself as needed. Do you understand what I mean? Not really? She looked up from her desk and glared at him hard. Next, you need to ask Flean about multiclassing. You have no hope of getting anywhere in your current state. I cannot explain it to you as that would be viewed as cheating, but there is no reason he can't. Ask him about what? Multiclassing. What's that? I just told you that I can't tell you, and you need to ask Flean. This is too close already to breaking, never mind. Just ask Flean. Ask Flean what again? God damn it, are you really that dumb? What? How dumb? Alright, I can't do this. Looks like I am going to have to fix a few things so we can speak more openly. Back you go. A splatter of drool hit Boyd in the face. Jellybean Jenkins' foul, hot dog breath permeated Boyd's nose. Jellybean Jenkins shouted at the group, "It isn't dead." A shame. Now is not the time for sleeping human. Awake. We must go. The Foray was already walking towards Portcullis. Boyd stood up to join them. They had been walking for days. The group was growing increasingly tired of the pace, but broke up the monotony with Gorpling murders. During this period, they killed any Gorpling camps they came across and tapped any associated mana nodes. While Boyd was hopeful there would be some piece of useful for gear for him, there was not. Gorpling armor wasn't usable by humans, and he retched at the smell of it, so he certainly wasn't going to push the issue. Boyd tried repeatedly to explain his version of things to the Foray, but he never made any progress. Every time he tried to explain that they could just walk around and kill everything without triggering the ambush, they all just spaced out and asked when the ambush would happen. Eventually, he gave up, and just watched from the sidelines. He gained a small amount of experience from watching his fellow combatants kill a large number of Gorplings, but the trip was largely full of very long periods of walking. Boyd tried to use this time to learn about the maze and his new existence, but his companions were less than interested and not always forthcoming. Moreover, they had no use for him. What he could get done in an hour, they could get done in an instant. I got a question. If I got all this mana, how come we don't just use that? How come we gotta get all these mana nodes? They are very different in nature, friend Boyd. You can think of it like this: the mana that you use is inherent to your body. It is a reflection of your ability to interact with inherent magical forces. The mana nodes we are seeking are representative entities. You can think of them as a marker for a concentrated ball of mana. They are untapped potential. If you have 10 mana for your personal use, each mana node would be like having 10 million mana for communal use. Gotcha. That makes sense. Boyd didn't understand what they were saying, but Fleon always got cross when he didn't understand things. Hey, I got another question. How come you all have such cool-ass classes, and I am stuck as monk, unassigned? Boyd asked the group. Fleon answered, and was typically the only person who would: all of us have base class. We have evolved these classes based on our actions and accumulation of experience. My base class is Paladin, but because of my superior commitment to Ior, I was named High Paladin by my people. Jellybean Jenkins is a fighter, but became Wolflord when he conquered one of the 7 planes. Jellybean merely snorted. Salia is an engineer. The VMR is a ranger though. The result is their combined class is Mechanized Ranger. Because the Venian Mechanized Ranger is the premier entity of this type in the known universe, her class is Venian Mechanized Ranger. Salia, via the VMR, gave a small bow. Gmol doesn't actually have a class. He is a physical manifestation of Lam. Because this power is divine in nature, he is most similar to a cleric and fills that role. Boyd saw an opening. So Salia multi-classed? Salia said, not exactly. My only class is engineer, but since the VMR is a ranger, I am a hybrid. Is Paladin a multi-class? Fleon answered, no, Paladin is a class in and of itself that combines aspect of fighter and aspects of cleric. What's the difference then? Multi-classing gives you only the ranks in that class that you invest your experience in. It's usually a bad idea, as ranking up becomes extremely difficult over time and you want to specialize if you can. Hybrids gain all of the abilities of a single class, but have a mix of skills, and are less likely to have failures. We aren't as specialized in one aspect of combat, but we are competent and capable at what we can do. Multiclassing is usually done to combine 2 sets of skills, or combine a minor ability from one class with the majority being invested in another. Since I am a monk, unassigned, should I multi-class? The group paused for a second, then answered in their standard order of Fleon, Salia, and then Jellybean Jenkins, with occasional input from Gmol. Yeah. Probably. Gmol's rune in his chest projected a thumbs up. Nothing will save you from the inevitability of my maw, human. Use any class you want, your destiny is within my jaws. It was a group consensus of yes. So what should I be instead? Boyd asked. Most of us who ever enter the maze have trained extensively before we choose these things. In fact, most who enter the maze are from magically attuned societies who long since chose their class. You'll need more basic stat points, which you get from ranking up, to have access to most of the better classes. I have no idea what you want to do, but with your current strength and your previous points in monk, there are a number of fighter classes that should open up to you. I want a gun. I'm a crack shot. I took a 12-point buck last season. What's is that? Jellybean scoffed, it's a form of chattel. It stands still while the humans shoot it with pitiful chunks of metal fired from a tube. It has no defenses, no knowledge, and no combat experience. It is non-aggressive. It is essentially a target that you can eat. They are delicious and stupid. So you have no practical combat experience with guns then? I shot the deer. Right, so you can hit larger objects standing still. What about small objects running towards you with a dagger in their hand, hell-bent on stabbing you in the face? Any experience there? Didn't think so. No guns. Boyd thought for a minute, what about magic spells? Gmol's rune projected a laughing face into the sky. This was met with general laughter from the rest of the group. Why can't I use magic? You're dumb. Also, you are from a non-magical society and have no training. Also, no one will teach you because you're incompetent. And also you're dumb, Salia said. So, someone can train me to use magic? Salia tossed him a rolled-up piece of paper. That's the closest you are ever going to get. What's this? A scroll through a small miracle of magic. Monks are allowed to use scrolls even without a deity, as long as the magic isn't necromancy or directly an affront to their god. You don't have a god, because no one likes you, so you can do anything but necromancy. You have to have a scroll though. What's this one? It's called Summon Food. What's it do? Take a wild guess. And I just read it? Can you read it? Despite the fact it wasn't written in English, Boyd realized he could read it. He had no idea what the syllables meant, or what syllables were, but he understood them. When he finished reading the words, the scroll glowed and he felt a surge of energy. Leave his body. Suddenly a small feast appeared before him. It contained an array of what appeared to be fruits, preserved cuts of meat, stalks of what he assumed were vegetables, and other assorted dry goods and breads. He beamed at this good works and started clapping his hands. He began feasting on the foods which were surprisingly edible, better than most of what he had eaten thus far. Diggin' you guys. Hey, why haven't we been doing this for the whole time? Hey, do we have more of these? What other scrolls can I do? The rest of the team continued walking. You guys? You guys wait up. Don't you want to try this? We are here on a mission, Sir Boyd. We eat once a day, and this is not that once. Do as you will, but if you aren't caught up within a minute, we will continue on without you at our maximum pace, Fleon said. Boyd grabbed an armful of food and ran up to the group. This is the first useful thing I've learned. If I did multi-classing, can I still use scrolls? They nodded affirmatively. Any recommendations on what I should multi-class into? What would help the team the most? Boyd took this as a time to be quiet. He'd gotten everything he needed anyway. System, you have discovered the hub city of Portcullis. Portcullis was an amazing accomplishment that Boyd could hardly believe. The city was aptly named. It was walled in entirely, surrounded by solid marble at least 50 feet high. Atop the marble sat a number of intricately crafted marble heads with different faces. The wall extended farther than Boyd could see in any direction. If the same thing had been built on Earth, if it could have been built on Earth, it would have cost many decades of many countries' GDP. Like most things on Zenith, maze or not, it had been fashioned with a degree of magic that was no longer possible. The Portcullisians, or whatever the people who lived there liked to be called, were faintly human, but taller and sleeker. Much like their impossibly amazing wall, they were not something that would occur naturally, and had clearly been enhanced with magic. They looked like what humans would look like if all humans had side careers as runway models in a science fiction TV show. This sort of extreme was fairly common in the maze. Why make a partially simulated reality if you can't fill it with impossibly beautiful things? The only way into the city was through, not surprisingly, a large portcullis. A guard stood at the gate and checked paperwork. The group queued into a long line of various creatures, human-like and not. They were all NPCs, creations of Zenith, and not combatants. It seemed like this was a daily event for them though, some sort of play they performed over and over. They presented their papers and marched on whenever the guard signaled them to go. Whenever someone didn't have paperwork, the guard promptly yelled at them and sent them off the other direction. I don't have any paperwork, Boyd said. No one has any paperwork. Paperwork takes time and effort, Salia replied. Then how are we going to get in? Boyd asked. There are 4 ways into Portcullis. 1. Bribe the guard, I don't like spending money though. 2. Swim the moat and enter through the sewers. Gmol can't swim though. 3. Fly Flean and I are the only ones that can fly, and he needs a horse to do it so someone is likely to notice, Salia said. So which one are doing? Number 4? That's right. 4. Kill the guard while no one is looking and then skedaddle. The VMR made an attempt at a smile. Flean looked at the group and then sauntered off towards the edge of the bridge. I, Flean, High Paladin of the Foray, am now standing well to the side of the rest of my foray. I am not paying attention to their actions, and I cannot be held responsible for them. I am being noble and chaste over here in this area. Flean motioned towards the area around him with his hand and then sat down to pray. He drew the blade of light and majesty and slammed it into the ground before kneeling in front of it and bowing his head. The blade beamed with majestic light. Flean can't participate because of his oath, but fortunately Jellybean and I are less morally bound to goodness. I need you to do something though. Hold this. Salia handed Boyd a small wooden box. What's this? It's not important. Just hold it and keep walking. When I give a signal, open the box. I don't understand, why don't we just get papers? Or just pay? Paying is a waste of money and papers take time. The guard is of Zenith. He's not real. He gets resurrected to do this every 30 years. Probably 90 groups a year use option 4. If they didn't want you to do it, they'd stop making the guards rank 10. Now hold the box and shut up. The group moved slowly up the bridge and other groups, none of which were forays, moved through the bridge. The scripted encounter continued until Salia stepped up to the guard. Boyd scanned the guard. System, guard, rank 10, he's a guard. He guards things. Whatever is behind him is probably that thing. This one's pretty simple, why are you scanning a guard? Papers, please, the guard said. Hold on, I think they are in that box my friend is carrying, Salia winked at Boyd. We're friends? Boyd did as told and spark and lights shot out of the box. It reminded him of a fancy fountain on the 4th of July. It was gorgeous, an array of sounds and colors. The guard and all of the other locals stared in wonder. He himself stood there watching the beautiful display. He felt Jellybean Jenkins slip past him and obstruct his view of the guard, but thought nothing of it. The lights on the box started to fade and he heard a gurgling noise in the background, followed by a quick splash. No one else noticed as the box was finishing its finale. Salia grabbed him by the collar and pulled him. Gmol, Jellybean, and Flean were already well on their way down the bridge. Boyd set the box down as it began to close and marched along with the rest of his foray. He took a moment to look back and saw the guard floating in the moat with his throat slit. Boyd couldn't understand that he wasn't real. To him, it was a murdered person. He wasn't human, but he had human-like features. Boyd couldn't stop staring at him floating in the river as they pulled him forward. He realized he couldn't separate murder from killing things in Zenith. He wondered whether he could survive here if this is what it took. They marched into the city without further incident. Portcullis was a safe city, well defended by numerous guardsmen, although none of them seemed cognizant of their fallen comrade. Fighting between forays was discouraged, but possible in towns. However, Flean was fairly sure they would be in last place at this point and unlikely to encounter another group, which reduced any concerns about infighting between forays. Flean knew of an inn that was in the central part of the city, which was marked as their destination. While most days the inn would be full towards the start of a maze, most of the forays had already descended to lower levels and thus it would likely be empty. Flean stated that they would stay there and find whatever mana nodes were still available in the city and descend as soon as possible. Boyd wasn't sure what any of that meant, but assumed it meant he could leave, and so he was very excited for it. The walk to the inn was uneventful, as was the acquisition of their room. Flean paid for the largest suite and they set it as their base of operations. Each of them had separate rooms, which was a luxury Flean assured them was unlikely to continue indefinitely. The inn had food and beds available, but no showers or anything else of this nature. It was well appointed, and the beds were soft, so Boyd was fine. He hadn't had a shower in a while, but he also didn't care about showering that much. The only notable event was the increasingly common groan associated with a system update. System update: Team Angwar's annihilating amperage is the first to descend to level 7. Every time this occurred, the entire time winced and stared angrily at Boyd. It was a constant reminder they were being held back. Portcullis was normally an important source of both quests and tappable mana nodes. This was in the first 2 to 3 days of a launch though, and thus most of the easy and useful materials had already been tapped. What should have been a quick one-day adventure through relatively simple territory was now going to be a slog to meticulously check the out-of-the-way mana nodes until they could find what they needed. It was decided that the fastest way to catch up to the rest of the forays and maximize the amount of tappable mana nodes they could find would be to split up and aggressively try and find nodes as singles. Level 1 of the maze was absolutely not a threat to the majority of the party, and thus Fleon would stay with Boyd while the rest of the group split into individual efforts. The goal was to finish mana node gathering within a few days, and then decide on how far to descend. The only real risk was running into a full foray, but Fleon was confident that most of the competent groups would have moved on, and any amount of thoughtful action would prevent losses and maximize gains. Boyd was just starting to drift off. He was in a state of near constant panic since entering the maze. He was physically and mentally exhausted, but just couldn't shut his brain down. The constant danger left him nervous and jittery. Not helping the matter, his door suddenly burst open and he arose with a scream. "Human! Tonight I will sleep at the foot of your bed. You will permit this and appreciate the warmth that I bring." Jellybean Jenkins morphed into a more dog-like form and climbed onto the bottom of Boyd's bed. "What? Why?" Boyd asked. "You have heard my declaration. Tonight I will sleep at the foot of your bed as I once did for the ones they called Martin and Sarah Jenkins. You will appreciate my warmth and feel comfort from my presence. Is this like a choice? Is this like, or else, because I don't know if I want that?" Jellybean Jenkins thought for a minute. "Yes, I will allow you to choose. You may choose my stated outcome or you may choose combat to the death. I will honor whichever choice you make." "That's not really much of a choice though, right?" "It is an honorable choice. You benefit from either decision. You either die by my hand and feed the pack or you gain the benefit of having me at your feet during the evening. Both options bring honor to your miserable bloodline. Are you going to eat me at night?" Jellybean Jenkins licked his lips. "I hadn't made a decision either way. If I do not eat you, will you agree to let me sleep at your feet?" "Yes. Definitely yes. It is settled. Let us rest. I'm not actually tired yet though man, I was going to stay up and study this book on Zenith that Fleon let me borrow." Jellybean morphed back into his bipedal form and abruptly scooped up Boyd and contorted his body into a sleeping position and then slammed him down onto the bed. "It is now our time to sleep. You will commence resting now." Boyd wasn't a small guy, he was probably 210 pounds on Earth. Jellybean Jenkins easily weighed more than 600 pounds though, and thus when he laid at the bottom of the bed, it vaulted into the air and Boyd slid into Jellybean who promptly shoved him away brusquely while growling. They remained this way for much of the night, with Jellybean Jenkins taking up the bottom 2/3 of the bed, while Boyd tried to sleep on the upper third which was elevated by the difference in weight. Boyd ended up hooking his arm over the top of the bed to prevent himself from sliding down as Jellybean Jenkins got increasingly angry if Boyd fell into him while they were sleeping. Boyd briefly thought about retracting his offer, but assumed that would likely result in combat to the death, and thus he decided a poor night's sleep was better than death. The next day, the group divided into teams and left for the city in opposing cardinal directions. Zould hopped down the corridor. His speed could be defined as rapid or brisk, but given he was Nemidian, it didn't have the shuffle that comes with a walk. Nemidians hopped, so it looked more like a frog trying to get off a hot surface. Zould croaked at his team, "Tell me, what in the world could have possibly come undone?" I rechecked all of the calculations myself. Everything was perfect. Why am I not staring at Lord Flean right now? Zult's team of aquamancers hopped behind him in kind. Transposition was difficult and complicated magic, but certainly not something that should prove difficult to the level of funding and talent present in the kingdom of the Foray. They had left the transposition room and were now hopping their way back to core facilities to determine what went awry. Sir, preliminary analysis indicates failure in one of the Foray's infinity engines. It seems like it miscalculated the position of some tangential material in the way between ourselves and Lord Flean's empire. How does an infinity engine make a mistake? This is not even possible. The only way infinity engines make an error is if. The other Numidian finished his sentence, it generated bad data. The checksum is off by an incredibly small percentage, but it appears like the error in the data was from Zenith itself. The sentence hung in the air. The Numidian language contained minimal numbers of slurs. They have no way of speaking ill directly of another person. They do have means to describe actions they find unfortunate. The sentence that Zult next said would directly translate to her actions indicate an unfortunate betrayal that leaves me heartbroken, but this betrays tonal variations in the Numidian dialect. A closer translation would be, Sir Zult, it may be that an honest error has occurred, one of the younger Numidians croaked from the back. Sir, I am sorry, I just. It's not your fault, youngling. I grow tense and warm. I must have time to allow myself to regain normal temperature. Please, allow me to return to my chambers. We will reconvene in 3 standard hours. During this time, please come up with any solution that would allow me to believe that we just didn't leverage the future of the Numidian race only to be thwarted at the very end. Zult's team of underlings hopped in random directions, all of them eager to please. He knew the answer though. They would find nothing. He just needed to buy time. Zult was staring into the scrying water. Empress, I do not understand. Empress Flyaflinia of the Foray stood tall. As Empress, she was expected to maintain her neck to its maximum length at all times. Given her 6-foot-tall frame, this placed her at around 13 feet in total. As such, keeping her in frame was very difficult, and Zult spent much of the time moving the scrying water around trying to get a focused image on her whole figure. Well, sorcerer, let me remind you of our deal then. We give you weapons and armor to defeat the Serpent Collective. In exchange, you assist my foray into Zenith. We gave you weapons, we gave you armor. Now you are not assisting me, and I want to understand why. Your Highness, the transposition failed. Lord Flean himself told me this was because of a failure in the calculations. This is a simple alliance. If you cannot hold up your end, then the Saldesians and I will simply split Zenith down the middle. Zult whirled internally, but outwardly he maintained his composure. What would you propose that I do? You're a sorcerer, enter sell something, and get your hopping ass into Zenith. Now. Zult nodded as the scrying waters faded. The Empress was insolent and rude. Their treaty had been a huge gain in his war against the Serpent, but he was starting to wonder just how long he would be paying down this debt. He made a mental note that as soon as possible he would enjoy watching her squirm for breath while she drowned in his waves. Flean and Boyd had been walking south for a few minutes. Flean was guiding them to an abandoned portion of the town that had but a few mana nodes. Because it was relatively inefficient to gather nodes here, it was also likely to be untouched. Flean explained that this area of town was both less dangerous and less bountiful, and thus they sent Boyd this way. Flean accompanied him largely because there was little to be gained from sending him any other direction, and his flying horse would attract a bit too much attention in town. Portcullis had a solidly medieval feel. It was mostly thatched roofs and stone buildings, although notably none of them ever seemed to leak, and the weather was surprisingly temperate both inside and out. Boyd could easily tell which of the buildings were shops and which of them were houses based on signage, although unlike most modern spaces they were essentially unseparated. He assumed that many of the buildings doubled as both the shop and the home for the shopkeeper since they were commonly attached. He realized that would be nice as it would save on rent, and then remembered that rent probably didn't exist here as the whole thing was dubiously even real. He saw a blacksmith, woodworking shops, what he assumed was a stable for selling horses, and all the other similar sorts. He wanted to go look around, but Flean kept pushing them forward. "Come, friend Boyd, we must make haste. The future of the Foray depends on our success." Boyd thought a minute. "What is the Foray anyway?" Flean stopped and pressed his hand against his breastplate. "My people are most noble and kind-hearted group in existence. We are the light of the universe. We are the guardians of peace and goodness. We are." Boyd almost immediately zoned out as he had heard this before, and was instead watching two children across the street. They were alternately pointing at Flean and chatting with one another. Having been a mischievous child himself, Boyd was fairly sure he knew what was getting ready to happen. Sure enough, he watched as one child started faking a hobble and heading towards Flean while the other mysteriously slunk into a nearby alley. "We are hope incarnate. We are servants of the Most Holy One. Oh dear me, a lame child. Child, come to your high paladin. Let me heal you of these wounds." Boyd watched with interest as the child sidled slowly up to Flean. "Dear sir, do you possess the powers of healing?" "My leg, good sir, I was born lame. It's never worked, sir. Could you possibly heal me?" "Dear boy, let me observe your malady. I am Flean, High Paladin of the Foray. I will use my connection with our holy goddess to repair your worthless limb and restore you to function so that you might use your legs to bend the knee to our most holy, Ior." Boyd saw the second little boy appear out of the alley behind them. He wasn't sure how the kid made it across the street undetected, but there he was. "Hold still, boy. Let Flean heal you." The boy sat in the street in front of Flean with his leg pointed forward. Flean started chanting and was enveloped in a golden hue and began to hum a prayer that Boyd couldn't understand. Soon Flean was literally ablaze with holy flames. The flames raged and then subsided into a single flame in his hand. He cupped it like a newborn bird before gently placing the flame on the boy's leg. Boyd saw the boy's leg shine brightly like it was burning and then suddenly stop. The boy leapt up and started laughing and clapping. Around this time, the second boy stole Flean's sword and was heading back towards the alley behind them. Boyd briefly thought about stopping him, but he wasn't sure if this was what he was supposed to do or not. "Thank you, sir. I've never felt so alive and so well. You are truly a powerful healer, Sir Knight." "Indeed, young man, I am a magnificent and powerful healer. Such is the power of Ior. Donate your life to the goddess and you too could become valuable to your fellows," Flean said boldly. "I must go now, sir. I must show my ma that I can run." The boy ran off towards the other side of the street, bouncing merrily along the way. "You see, friend Boyd, this is the power of Ior. This is the healing power that my goddess has given me so that I might bathe others in her light." "I thought people here weren't real," Boyd said. "They aren't, but it doesn't matter. Because a true hero helps the real and the non-real alike. A true hero helps anyone they can. This boy will find purpose with his new leg and use it to benefit Ior. Even non-real people deserve Ior's light. This boy was a noble and good-hearted young soul who fills Ior's heart with his joy." Boyd waited till Flean finished. "You know they stole your sword, right?" "What?" Flean felt around his belt for the pommel of the blade of light and majesty, but it was gone. "By her holy presence, that future priest of Ior has pilfered my blade. The blade of light and majesty. Get back here, you little shit." Flean took off across the street. Realizing the other boy had taken the blade, Boyd went the opposite direction. He prepared himself for battle as he entered the alley, assuming it would be filled with God knows what. Fortunately, the only thing he saw was an open grate that appeared to lead to some sort of sewer. While he was no genius, it was fairly obvious where the second boy had gone. Boyd popped down into the sewer, expecting pitch black, but was surprised to find what amounted to a well-lit little home. It smelled strongly of shit, but otherwise had torches, chairs, and most of the other accoutrements you would expect from two children living in a medieval sewer. This included a little boy holding the blade of light and majesty, staring at it intently. "Hey kid, gimme back that sword." Boyd was annoyed by the comment, but also remembered being a kid himself and the danger that adults offered. "Look here kid, I'm a big guy and I am a monk, and I want you to give me that sword back. It doesn't belong to you, so give it here. I'll tell your mama if you don't give it back." The small child disappeared in a poof of smoke and was left with what Boyd thought of as a tiny version of Satan with more arms. He scanned the creature. System, Shirvan Imp, Rank 3. Shirvan Imps are known primarily for two things: 1. Having a large number of arms, and 2. Using those arms to steal as much as they can. They aren't usually dangerous, but if you have something worth stealing, it's better to just kill them now rather than risk them taking it. Is that a fair approach? No. But Shirvan Imps are ornery little bastards and mostly evil. Notably, each of those arms can hold a dagger, so if you take the proactive approach, try not to get stabbed to death. The Shirvan Imp didn't have daggers in every hand, but it definitely had them in many of its hands. One of its hands also held the blade of light and majesty, which Boyd assumed was dangerous, even in the hands of a 30-pound creature with many arms. It dashed at Boyd, swinging each of its arms wildly. Boyd, having never been in a knife fight, took a very different approach and ran the opposite direction, not wanting to be stabbed to death. Boyd dashed for the ladder as fast as he could, but he could hear the Shirvan Imp catching up to him. He turned to look behind him and realized there was no way he would make it to the sewer ladder before the imp got to him, so he concentrated very hard on being a monk, unassigned, and did the first thing that made sense. This was to abruptly stop running and turn and try to kick the tiny creature in the face. You kick the Shirvan Imp for 5 damage. Life 11/25. You have been stabbed by a Shirvan Imp for 14 damage. You are impaled. Movement in your leg is impeded. Boyd definitely couldn't run this time, nor could he dodge, so he did the next best thing and leapt at the monster from his good leg. His actual plan at the time was sound in theory. The most likely outcomes were that either 1, his uncultured swine ability would activate given the incredible stupidity of the action, 2, he would die and no longer have to worry about his bleeding leg or this awful place, or more unfortunately, 3, he'd somehow win the fight and have to continue. The result was bad for Boyd and bad for the Shirvan Imp. Having never wielded a sword as heavy as the blade of light and majesty, attempting to slice Boyd in half knocked the creature dramatically off balance and Boyd landed on its back. While he was no fighter, anyone who had ever watched any UFC fights knew what to do in this scenario. Boyd wrapped his increasingly muscular arm around the creature's neck and began squeezing the life out of it. He quickly realized the Shirvan Imp was deceptively light, and he could effectively crush its windpipe entirely, whereupon he did just that. The creature sputtered a few seconds and then died. Shirvan Imp dies to your choke. You have gained 1 experience. System, Achievement Unlocked, Reputation Annoyed, Agents of Shiva. The Shirvans are an odd conglomerate of multi-armed creatures of various alignments and dispositions that for whatever reason have mutually come to the conclusion that non-insect-like creatures with more than 5 arms are generally the best thing. The bee's knees, assuming more than 5 legs. The cat's pajamas, assuming it has more than 5 arm holes for the more than 5 arms. Killing a minor entity left them annoyed with you. Stop killing things, and you will stop making enemies. Also, you'll probably die. You don't get experience for this, just enemies. Don't whine, I can't give you experience for everything. Boyd picked up the blade of light and majesty. He felt a power surge through him like he had never felt before. The pommel of the blade burned his hands, but he couldn't let it go. He swung it back and forth with glee. Every time he slashed with the blade, it was like he was cutting through his own nightmares. He felt empowered, sated, and holy just being a part of it. It was like he was holding a warm summer's day as peace echoed throughout his body. He was still in awe of its genuine light and majesty when Flean showed up and promptly swatted it out of his hands. Put that down, heathen. You are not capable of wielding this blade. Flean picked the sword up off the ground and sheathed it. Boyd's entire life came crashing down around him in an instant. He had felt pure and peaceful and calm while holding the blade. Now he back in Zenith, lonely, cold, stinking of shit, and without any idea how he would ever see his friends and family again. Why did it make me feel that way? Boyd asked. It is the blade of light and majesty, the personal weapon of the High Paladin of the Foray. It has untold powers. It was purifying your spirit, I am sure. Enhancing your natural charisma and holiness. Given your pitiful state, it probably felt like holding godhood. Boyd blinked. Yeah, pretty much. Flean looked Boyd up and down. I am eternally grateful though. Losing this sword would have been akin to losing my life, nay, worse than losing my life. I would have been forever in shame. I offer repayment to you, friend Boyd. Oh, nah man, I was just helping out. I know you like your sword a lot. I wasn't gonna let that thing steal it. I seen what they was planning. I figured I could whoop a little kid. The whole turning into a monster thing was a bit of a scare, but we got it back. Flean began stripping off his armor and smiled. Kneel in front of me, friend Boyd. What? Fall on your knees in front of me, friend Boyd. Look up so that I might fill you with my honor. Open your mouth so that you might drink my holy succor. Boyd waved his hands. That you know I'm good with everybody out there, like I ain't prejudiced or nothin', but I don't see you like, well, you know man. Like, that just ain't me, no offense or nothin'. Flean was now wearing nothing other than his undergarments, a robe of pure white emblazoned with the seal of the Foray. Kneel, Boyd. It is time I bless you with my holiness. Boyd was extremely uncomfortable with the idea, as kneeling in front of Flean gave him consideration of several potentially awful outcomes, and very few good ones. Somewhat begrudgingly, and with great concern, Boyd knelt in front of Flean. Flean extended his neck to its maximum height. He had to curl part of it against the lower sewer ceilings, but it didn't seem to bother him. He began glowing a yellow, brighter and brighter, a warming and calming aura emanating from his body. I, Flean, High Paladin of the Foray, proclaimed Boyd. Flean's aura went out. Do you have titles or other names, friend Boyd? Yeah, it's Boyd Bridges. Look, we don't have to do this, I'm good dude. Whatever you're doing seems nice and all, but I'm just old Boyd, no need for this. Flean's aura of heat and holiness lit a flame again. I, Flean, High Paladin of the Foray, proclaim Boyd Bridges to be a true and noble servant of the Foray. His actions today transcend our typical failings. His actions today represent the best of all the Foray hopes to become. Today, you kneel as Boyd, you arise as Sir Boyd, Knight of the Foray. May Ior always guard your soul from the evils of this world. Flean took the blade of light and majesty and conked Boyd on the top of his head. Boyd immediately felt unconscious from the strength of the blow. What happened? Boyd woke up slung across Flean's armored shoulder, marching back down the street. You regained my blade, and then I knighted you. I might have knighted you a bit too hard. I am not used to knighting people who are so low rank. You were dying of a head wound, so I healed you, and then now we are heading back to the inn. Okay. Boyd remained slung over Flean's shoulder as he marched at high speed with great flair. Could you put me down? Flean set Boyd down and they started marching side by side, Boyd mostly running. Hey Flean, I think I know what class 1 want to be. I want to be a swordsman. There is no such thing. There is fencer, but you do not fence. There is samurai, but you lack the focus. There is chevalier, but you cannot ride a horse. There is. Isn't there just a guy that hits shit with a sword? You don't have a sword, so why would this be of interest? Let's go get me a sword then. Flean thought for a minute before responding, no.